The public may view the meeting on public television on City TV Channel 24 for Cox Communication and Spectrum, or Channel 99 for AT&T UVerse, or view the meeting online by going to the City Council Committee's homepage at sandiego.gov and selecting the City TV Live Webcast button on the right-hand side of the page. The committee meetings will be held virtually using the Zoom webinar platform. Members of the public can offer public comment on items by accessing the Zoom webinar online using a desktop, computer, laptop, tablet, or smartphone, or by calling into the meeting using a smartphone, cellular phone, or landline. The link to join the committee meeting webinar by computer, tablet, or smartphone is listed on the agenda. To join the Zoom webinar by telephone, you may dial 1-669-254-5252. When prompted, input webinar ID 160-532-0355#. This information is also available on the agenda and will appear on the screen during the public comment period for each item. When the chair introduces the item you would like to comment on, you will raise your hand by either tapping the raise your hand button on your computer, tablet, or smartphone, or by pressing *9 on your phone. You'll be taken in the order in which you raise your hand. You may only speak once on a particular item. When I indicate it is your turn to speak, I will call you by your name as it appears on the Zoom webinar attendee list, or I'll read out the last four digits of your phone number if you have called into the meeting. That is how you will know it is your turn to speak. If you have joined the webinar by computer, tablet, or smartphone, you will receive a pop-up notice to select to unmute your device. If you have called into the meeting by cell phone or landline, press *6 on your phone to unmute yourself. We will review these instructions briefly again when the public comment period on an item is open. Please wait until the item you wish to speak to has been called before raising your hand to speak. If you raise your hand during a non-comment period, your hand will be lowered. When you are announced as the next speaker, please unmute yourself and offer your comments. Also, please mute the volume on your TV or computer before you begin to speak. Chair?
Thank you, Brendan. I do want to recognize that it is Jordan Moore with us from the Office of the Independent Budget Analyst. A quorum is now present. We will now dispense with the approval of the committee actions of July 15, 2021. Do I have a motion to approve the committee actions?
I will move, Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair Von Wilpert.
I'll second.
Thank you, Councilmember Kate. We will now take council member questions and comments and have each council member register their vote. Please remember to mute yourself once you've completed your comments, starting with Vice Chair Von Wilpert.
I vote yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember LaCava.
Yes.
Councilmember Kate.
Yes.
Thank you. I would also like to register a yes vote. That passes unanimously. We will now take.
Chair, I think you muted yourself.
Brendan, can you hear me?
Yep. Public comment?
Yep. Take it away.
Per temporary rule 2.6, non-agenda public comment is an opportunity for members of the public to comment on items that are not on the agenda, but within the subject matter jurisdiction of the committee. Each speaker will have 2 minutes, and we will take up to 30 minutes of non-agenda public comment at this time. If there are more speakers than 30 minutes allow, we will continue non-agenda public comment after all agendized items are heard. We do have a couple high-profile items on the agenda, particularly on the People's Ordinance. The appropriate time to raise your hand to speak on the People's Ordinance is when that item is introduced. That is item 2, and we will get to that later in the meeting. Again, the non-agenda public comment is for the comments regarding topics that are not on the agenda. With that, the public comment period for non-agenda public comment is now open. If you have already joined the Zoom webinar online or by phone, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. If you are watching on City TV or the live stream online and would like to call into the meeting to speak, please call 1-669-254-5252. When prompted, input webinar ID 160-532-0355#. To raise your hand to speak, select the raise your hand button or press *9. When I let you know it is your turn to speak, unmute yourself by either selecting the unmute prompt that will appear on your device or by pressing *6 on your cell phone or landline. Okay, we have currently 7 speakers in the queue. I will start with Kathy Hanzel. You can unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. My name is Kathy Hansel. As a San Diego citizen and the Vice President of the San Diego chapter of the International Dark Sky Association, I would like to raise a concern, please, about the installation of 4,000K CCT streetlights throughout San Diego. These lights contain blue light, which is known to be harmful to the environment and to human health. The city of Tucson, Arizona upgraded their streetlights to 3,000K and reduced light pollution by 7%. The city of San Diego is actually increasing the levels of light pollution and sky glow over our city by installing these 4,000K streetlights. Though this might have been the right decision at the time, there's a lot of new information about LED streetlights that we need to consider. These bright lights are contrary to the purpose and intent of our outdoor lighting ordinance contained within the municipal code, which states outdoor lighting fixtures shall be installed in a manner that minimizes the negative impacts from light pollution, including light trespass, glare, and urban sky glow, in order to preserve the enjoyment of the night sky. Light pollution is destroying natural darkness with severe consequences. Scientists link light pollution to global insect decline, which impacts pollination and our food supply. Also of note are the deaths of millions of migrating birds, increased carbon emissions resulting in greenhouse gases and climate change. It also impacts numerous diseases such as obesity, diabetes, and cancer, like breast cancer and prostate. As a breast cancer survivor myself, I urge this committee to review the materials I've submitted for consideration, including a 2016 warning from the American Medical Association stating that street light installations should be 3,000K or less. More than 25 cities have moved away from 4,000K light installations. Please, San Diego, consider the health consequences and environmental consequences. I'm happy to provide additional information. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Carol Green.
Hi, good afternoon. I would like to speak to you about the link between environmental pollution and marijuana grows. Since I have limited time, I'm going to focus on pollution and ozone, but new research has linked the production of marijuana to a host of environmental issues ranging from water to degradation of public lands to wildlife deaths and, as I mentioned, the ozone. Most of this research comes out of the University of California at Berkeley and a new study out of the University of North Carolina, Gillings School of Public Health. So these are not, these are reputable situations. The working air quality, the work out of the University of North Carolina's Gillings School of Public Health is working on an air quality model to better understand how commercial cannabis cultivation could affect the atmosphere. So far, the research shows that cannabis plants produce volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, that can produce harmful pollutants. And one of the researchers says if plants produce VOCs, there's a high possibility that under certain conditions, cannabis cultivation could impact the ozone. Cannabis emits potent VOCs called terpenes, and that when mixed with nitrogen oxide and sunlight from the ozone degrading aerosols in a high desert area like Denver, which is where they were doing most of this study, where there are normally few VOCs, this can have a detrimental effect on the ozone. A significant number of cannabis plants being grown with a regular source of VOC is exacerbating the issue by combining with other man-made nitrogen oxide spewed from many cars in the urban environment. And you can find out more about this study at the American Institute of Biological Sciences. But there is a high propensity and correlation between VOCs and the detriment of the ozone layer, and this is coming from cannabis grows. I'm pointing this out because the city of San Diego is considering expanding.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I have to cut you off. Next speaker is John Boderoff. You can unmute yourself.
Hello, Commissioners. My name is John Bodorf with cleanearthforkids.org. Tomorrow is California Clean Air Day, and to protect our air and environment, we must move away from fossil fuels. The Huntington Beach oil spill is a reminder of why. Please draft a building electrification reach code like the city of Encinitas to stop natural gas lines in new construction, and draft an ordinance to stop wood burning fireplaces in new construction as well. Wood smoke is a complex mixture of gases and fine particles that irritate the lungs and are linked to not only lung problems, but heart and brain conditions like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Wood smoke also contains cancer-causing pollutants like benzene, formaldehyde, acrolein, and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. I also asked the commission to request the city to remove beach fire rings at all city beaches. Everyone has the right to clean air, the right to go to the beach without coughing and risking their health. By allowing beach fires, those with lung conditions like asthma or COPD are denied access, and Black children would have twice the asthma rates as white children. We must protect our air, and there are fires throughout the state with smoke drifting all the way to the East Coast and beyond. Please give people a place to go for clean air. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Jan Hinsman. Jan, you can unmute yourself now.
Hi, I am president of the Friends of the College Rolando Library. Libraries contribute to an environment that enables individuals, neighborhoods, and cities to advance. During budget hearings, I've heard council members wax eloquent on their importance. Our library's surrounding physical environment is about to be destroyed, and we need your help. This spring, the city's planning commission sounded the alarm on this matter and pointed a way forwards for the council. Unbelievable but true, the city does not own the land under our library's entrance and driveway and its major parking area, and the owner of the land has plans that will destroy that access. What is also unbelievable is that past administrations had opportunities to fix things but did not act, despite strong pleas from the community. This council and this mayor are very fortunate. Last spring, your planning commission changed the narrative. When reviewing the investors' community plan change proposal, commission members identified the administrative strategies needed to fix the problem. And they cautioned that the city must step outside business as usual and take actions before hearing the requested zoning change. Your chairman is our council member, and he knows this issue well. He can fill you in on all the gory details. There is a very practical reason for our council members themselves to respond to the Planning Commission's alarm. If the matter isn't addressed administratively by the mayor now, the council will soon be forced into the fray, and you will be asked to vote on a community plan amendment that leaves the library severely compromised. Then the stakes will be higher, the positions polarized, and resolution more difficult. We hope you will be spared this circumstance and ask you help us elevate this matter to the mayor's attention. Thank you.
Thanks, Jan. Next speaker, Suzanne Hume. You can unmute yourself.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Suzanne Hume. I'm the Educational Director and founder of CleanEarthForKids.org. To protect children's lungs, hearts, brains, educational outcomes, mental health, and future, we must reduce air pollution and greenhouse gases. This includes reducing vehicle miles traveled and stopping sprawl, which we'll talk about today. Of course, building electrification, definitely the ordinance to stop wood burning fireplaces in new construction, and so many other things that we can do. We have an action plan on our website, cleanearthforkids.org. San Diego has an F, San Diego County has an F in ozone and D in particulate matter. So it's so important that we go for renewable energy, EV charging stations, and a buyback program for leaf blowers and lawn mowers, and think of everything that we can do to protect our air for our kids and their future. So excited about the important work that you are doing and excited to partner. Thank you so much for everything today, and we're excited to work with you. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
Thank you. You too. Next speaker, Peggy Walker. You can unmute yourself.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, commissioners. I just want to add my voice to the protest against the vendor situation in Ocean Beach that's so out of hand. It is public land, so we need our council to do something about it. And it seems that your committee, the Environment Committee, is a good place to get an ordinance underway to provide order there. I don't have anything against vendors selling handmade items, but what I really find unacceptable is the fact that people are selling marijuana and giving away free samples. That is illegal and should be stopped. This isn't the kind of environment that we want for our kids and families. I think you know that. We've been told over and over that this is why we must have permitted dispensaries, to do away with the illegal sales. So why is this allowed to go on? It really needs to stop. And along with this sales or giving away of free marijuana, where there's pot in public places, there's secondhand smoke from pot use. And as an earlier speaker said, everyone has the right to go to the beach, enjoy clean air and a pot-free environment. So I would ask you, Environmental Committee, please do something about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Louis Rodolico.
Good afternoon. In 2003, environmental terrorists burnt the affordable Crossroads apartment complex to the ground. This University City affordable housing project was in the wood framing stage and ripe for arson. This $50 million arson remains the largest eco-terrorist event in the United States. The arsonists have evaded law enforcement, and to this day, city planners are wary of allowing any project to go forward when any conservancy or environmental group objects. Westfield Mall wanted all traffic to continue up Genesee so their rents would remain high. They met secretly with conservancy group Friends of Rose Canyon. Westfield did not want the planned Regents Road Bridge built. Had it been built, traffic counts would have dropped on Genesee, and so would Westfield rents. Westfield paid $500,000 for an environmental impact report that somehow did not include ambulance service times, and based on county statistics, only having one of South UC's 3 main roads completed results in 7 unnecessary deaths each year. Planning has ordained environmental and conservancy groups as the voice of the community. This summer, when a developer came forward with an affordable housing project, privileged, wealthy university brought out the torch again. This time, planner Witherspoon and the Friends of Rose Canyon made false statements saying an affordable housing project was an open space and could not be built. Their statements were a de facto cry for yet another arson in University City. Locally and nationally, privileged citizens ally themselves with wealthy corporations and anarchists. If they cannot get their way, they become destructive. In University, they did not want roads that would bring buses, transit-oriented intersections, and therefore minorities into their community. They harm us locally by extending ambulance service times, and nationally by extending the pandemic. Domestic terrorism is now our greatest threat, and city planning is giving them comfort.
Thank you. Next speaker, Pam Eam. Pam, unfortunately, I can't unmute you or give you permission to speak because you have an older version of Zoom. Sorry, we can't have you speak. Pam, if you're able to call in quickly, we can take your comments, but I'm not able to unmute you from your computer. Chair, Pam is our last speaker in the queue.
Okay, thank you, Brendan. We will now move to committee members, mayoral staff, city attorney, and IBA comment. Are there any committee, mayor, city attorney, or IBA analyst comments? Okay. Hearing none, do we have any requests for continuance? Hearing none of those either, we will now take up the discussion agenda. Brendan, can you please introduce item 1?
Item 1, first amendment to the agreement for as-needed invasive weed management services with Black Sage Environmental Incorporated to authorize additional funds and to include required grant language RFP 089-624-20-V. The public comment period for this item is now open. If you have already joined the Zoom webinar online or by phone, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. If you are watching on City TV or the live stream online and you would like to call into the meeting to speak, please call 1-669-254-5252. When prompted, input webinar ID 160-532-0355 pound. To raise your hand to speak, select the raise your hand button or press *9. Chair? Chair, you're on mute.
Jeff, for this item, please introduce yourselves for the record and let us know how much time you need.
Good afternoon. We need about 8 minutes for the presentation.
Great, please proceed.
Great. My name is Kelly Balo. I'm an Assistant Deputy Director with the Public Utilities Department, and we're happy to be here today to provide a brief presentation on the action before you as an amendment to the Black Sage contract. I'm here with Stacy Damasco, Senior Environmental Planner. I'm actually going to turn the floor over to Stacy to provide our presentation today.
Hi, good afternoon. I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stacy Damasco. I'm a senior planner with the Public Utilities Department, and I will be presenting this request for the first amendment to the as-needed invasive weed management agreement with Black Sage Environmental. The Public Utilities Department owns and manages nearly 40,000 acres of rural lands that surround 7 reservoirs, as shown in this figure. The light blue areas indicate the rural lands that we manage. This figure also illustrates the local watersheds. In general, a watershed is an area of land that drains streams and rainfall to one common outlet. You can see the San Diego River watershed in this bold outline. And you can see that our San Vicente and El Capitan reservoirs are encompassed within this watershed. So our reservoirs are naturally part of this associated water system. A healthy watershed will ultimately protect the water supply and quality of our reservoirs. Public Utilities' active management of these 40,000 acres improves the natural landscapes in the watershed surrounding the reservoirs through enhancement of native habitat and removal of non-native and invasive species. Healthy natural landscapes within the watersheds filter pollutants before they reach our reservoirs. The water in these reservoirs is treated at the city's drinking water treatment plants and provide about 10% of our local water supply. In addition, they store emergency supplies of water. This figure illustrates Public Utilities' extensive water supply system. The reservoirs take in runoff from local watersheds and through a system of pipelines and pump stations convey water between reservoirs and the water treatment plants. Although watersheds are not a hard asset like our built-in infrastructure, they are just as important and the first step to provide clean drinking water. Sustaining an undisturbed natural landscape on lands that drain to our reservoir is the best way to provide source water protection and protect water quality. Creating this initial barrier has a direct correlation to water quality and ensuring the health and safety of the public water supply. Public utilities staff provide routine daily management of lands to protect our reservoirs. They provide road maintenance and access control, trash removal and signage, as well as biological survey and monitoring and environmental review and permitting. Black Sage services strike a good balance or complements this routine daily work to protect our reservoirs by providing the more infrequent specialized services of habitat enhancement and invasive species control. Black Sage has specialized experience in natural resource management and holds current required California State Contractor C27 license and California Department of Pesticide Regulation Qualified Applicator license. This contract provides the ability for public utilities to implement grant-funded projects, which I will provide examples of in later slides. Black Sage has proven to be reliable and competent during this first year of the contract. The type of work conducted under this contract includes invasive weed management and prevention, enhancement and restoration of native species, erosion control, biomass management, and vegetation mapping. All projects completed under the Black Sage contract comply with applicable local, state, and federal environmental laws and regulations. Currently, Black Sage is providing invasive weed management services within the El Capitan Reservoir watershed to enhance habitat for native species. This effort has improved a total of 62 acres of habitat. Invasive species such as arundo, tamarisk, and Mexican fan palms have been removed or treated, thereby improving water supply and quality and reducing fuel loads in the riparian corridor. This effort is partially grant funded by the California Department of Water Resources Prop 84 grant, which provides funding for projects that help local public agencies meet the long-term water needs of the state, including the delivery of safe drinking water and the protection of water quality and the environment. This amendment also adds grant language so public utilities can continue to use this contract for grant matching projects. Public Utilities is also in the process of restoring Chaparral Canyon under this contract to improve water quality. The 10-acre site lies directly downstream of Murray Reservoir and will enhance almost 3,000 linear feet of riparian habitat through removal of invasive non-native vegetation and native habitat restoration. This project is also grant funded through Prop 1, Water Quality, Supply, and Infrastructure Improvement Act. The purpose of Prop 1 includes generating funding to address water quality, water supply, and watershed protection and restoration. This is a nice visual of this effort in Chaparral Canyon. The project area is just over 2 acres and has removed 62% of the Brazilian pepper trees, illustrated in the red, and half an acre of Mexican fan palm and Canary Island date palms, illustrated in the orange and yellow. Black Sage services are for infrequent projects, mostly initiated by grant opportunities. This contract was awarded for $1 million in 2020 and expires May 2025. Currently, there's no budget remaining for new projects, with 3.5 contract years remaining. Black Sage's specialized services directly contribute to public utilities' source water protection and land management tasks, and ensure we have the means to support grant matching opportunities. Public utilities request additional funds to cover the duration of the existing contract. We are here today to request your approval for a resolution to authorize the mayor to execute this first amendment to the agreement with Black Sage in an amount not to exceed $4 million, bringing the total not to exceed amount to $5 million, and to authorize the CFO to expend an amount not to exceed $4 million. This completes our presentation. Thank you for your time today and your consideration of this request. We're now available to take your questions.
Great, thank you. We will now proceed with public comment. However, before doing so, I just, as a matter of course, would like to see if the IBA or the City Attorney's Office have any comments on this item. Seeing none, we can go ahead and proceed with public comment. Brendan, go ahead.
To raise your hand to speak, select the raise your hand button or input *9. When I let you know it is your turn to speak, unmute yourself by either selecting the unmute button or by inputting *6. We have 2 speakers in the queue. John Boderoff, you can unmute yourself.
Yes, hello. This is John Boderoff with Clinic for Kids. I'm very concerned because in the presentation, there is no discussion on the methods they are using to manage or prevent weeds. I am very concerned about the pesticides that are being used. You talk about the water quality and protecting water quality in watersheds and reservoirs. And if that's the case, then no pesticides can be used. I can't even strongly emphasize that how imperative it is that pesticides are not used. If you have not seen it, recent articles in Intercept show the EPA is not properly protecting us from toxic chemicals, particularly pesticides, that the industry is basically dictating what tests are not being performed, particularly when you get into your immunology and endocrine disruption tests and toxicology tests. They are not being run. So I want to emphasize to this commission and to the city that just because it's legal does not mean it's safe. To be safe, we need to be not using chemical pesticides in these areas. There are a lot of non-chemical weed control methods like solarization and even goats that can be used to control weeds without using chemicals. So I again want to emphasize, I can't even strongly emphasize more enough, that if you want to protect water quality, you cannot allow them to use any pesticides. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker on this item, Suzanne Hume.
Hello, and thank you so much. My name is Suzanne Hume. I'm the educational director and founder of Clean Earth for Kids. I started Clean Earth for Kids because I was poisoned by pesticides that were allowed on county lands. And I cannot, so I left my teaching job and I work for free 7 days a week. And this issue is really important to us. And again, we'd love to talk with you more about non-toxic strategies, IPM, and ensure solarization, and ensure that toxic pesticides are not used. So the speaker spoke, or both speakers spoke about the importance of water quality. And we know for a fact, because we do a ton of research on this, that there are the US only bans 15 pesticides, China bans 51, the EU bans over 175 pesticides. And as John from Clean Earth for Kids stated in the Intercept article, Senator Blumenthal from Connecticut used the words disgraceful and alarming and concerning, etc., to describe what's going on with the pesticide industry, waiving over 89% of tests for pesticides between 2011 and 2018. We work closely with California Department of Regulation, pesticide regulation, in that we attend meetings, we see the kinds of pesticides coming on the market, and we're incredibly concerned. In terms of getting a pesticide applicator license, that's like nothing. So we are very concerned, and we have resources and things like that. So there's nothing specific in this plan. Absolutely vote no, because it doesn't say what's going to be used. We know that the data shows, right, that terrible pesticides are being used. If you'd like to see our spreadsheets and our data, we have public records that we have requested.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, we're going to have to move on to the next speaker. Next speaker is Louis Rodolico.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm with the local Fire Safe Council here in University City, and I'd like to see addressed by this group how they're going to deal with combustible weeds and other vegetation at the perimeter of some of these parks, especially when it's close to existing infrastructure like roads and homes and other businesses. I'd just like to see if they're addressing it. If not, I'd like to see council hopefully give them some instruction that when they are near property that can burn, that contains humans or business or whatever, that they give that a priority in terms of removing flammable growth. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Sally Small.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm from Emerald Hills, and I'm also a member of the San Diego Beekeeping Society. So yes, as the other speaker said, I am concerned regarding the pesticides, and if there are herbicides used as well. We are already having difficulties with our bees in the area not finding enough food. We know that Arondo doesn't provide any either, but we want to make sure that pesticides are not used. We do believe in integrated pest management, and we'd love to see that no companies that serve San Diego or our Park and Rec department and maintenance use pesticides near any people or any animals, including bees. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair, that concludes public comment on this item.
Thank you, Brendan, and thank you to all the members of the public for participating. I will now turn it over to the committee members for questions and comments and entertain a motion, beginning with Vice Chair Von Wilper.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you very much to our presenters today. Thank you to staff. Kelly, I very much appreciate your work on this. And everyone who called, I have a couple questions. One, I'm glad to see that Black Sage Environmental is proven to be a reliable contractor. That's fantastic. I do want to, for all the callers who called in, clarify what it is, what methods we are using. So I saw in the back of materials that it says management of PUD lands requires specialized experience and licenses that the city does not have. So could you answer what those skills and licenses are, and if they plan to use, I don't think they use pesticides since it's not a pest issue, but herbicides or anything like that?
Sure. So the first thing is this contract is only to be used on PUD lands. So some of the concerns about roadways or parks adjacent to roadways wouldn't really apply for most of our PUD lands, which are out in the rural areas of San Diego. We plan to use an integrated weed management approach. This is really important to us from an environmental standpoint and water quality standpoint. And what that integrated approach really means is that we use a variety of tools and methods to eradicate non-native species and fuel loads. And so we begin with hand removal, mechanical removal. Those are always our first choices before moving towards a different method that may involve herbicide use. This contract does allow for herbicide use. Again, it is used on a case-by-case basis when those other methods are not effective. Some of the specialty licenses that are required for this contract include C27 license, include the pesticide regulation qualified applicator license, and many of our grants also require proof of successful restoration projects in order to qualify.
Thank you. I may want to dig in more about what the herbicides we are using, and it's a good. I'm glad callers called in general, because it's not just a city issue; it's a county and a state issue. So I'm glad we're raising this. So another question about the amount of workers. So I read the workforce report and the HR clearance report, and I saw that there are 12 employees at Black Sage, which is under the 15 employees required for our diversity requirements, although they do have a diverse workforce, which is great. But I am wondering how 12 people are planning to do $5 million of brush abatement work, or are they going to hire subcontractors? We're not. And if they are those disclosed?
So the $5 million is not a guaranteed value. The request to amend the contract would allow us to utilize $5 million worth of work. We are not guaranteeing $5 million worth of work over the course of the contract. There still is 3.5 more years of work. And I would defer to Stacy to answer whether or not any subs are allowed to be used on this contract.
Okay. Right. There's currently no subs approved on this contract.
Okay, so 12 people can do all the brush management for all. I honestly just don't know.
So this contract is not intended to complete all of the brush management for public utilities lands. The Public Utilities Department has lake staff, reservoir keepers, and a construction crew that is used to do the primary management of our reservoir and rural lands. This contract is primarily slated or targeted to the specialized work in removal of exotics, primarily initiated from grant-funded projects.
Okay, got it. That makes more sense. Got it. Okay. Thank you. And I have one last question. Because PUD manages a great deal of land in San Pasqual and Rancho Bernardo. And so we are having a lot of issues with the Mexican fan palm, which, as we saw from the lightning strike earlier this week, when lightning hits palm trees, the embers go everywhere. So I'm wondering if any of this money might be utilized to help address the Mexican fan palm, because it's a big fire risk.
Yes, we have a number of projects that we are doing under this contract already to target the fan palm, and we do envision using this contract for removal of fan palms in the future. Yes.
Okay, got it. Okay, I appreciate that. I think I'm going to need a little more follow-up on the herbicide issue before this goes to full council, but I think those are my only questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Councilmember LaCava.
Thank you, Chair. Following up on some of the questions that raised by my colleague, Council Member Von Wilpert, I too had a hard time running the numbers of 9 laborers being able to handle this much work. And I guess I'm a little confused. We gave them a 5-year contract for $1 million. And now only a year in, we're asking for $4 million more. I'm not trying to understand why we've taken that approach. Can you help me understand?
Sure, that's a great question. I believe if we had had the foresight in knowing what grant opportunities were coming and were available, we would have considered a larger contract at the onset. We are asking for $4 million, and we understand it is considerably more than the original contract, but it would open the door to a number of amazing grant opportunities that would help restore these lands.
Are you imagining we're going to get, optimistically, of course, but $4 million in grants, in which we'll have the matching $4 million in city funds?
So every one of our grant opportunities is different. Some of them are a 50-50 match, like you mentioned. Others are very different, where a majority of the funds are grant money, and the city's only asked for a small portion. We are hopeful that we will be able to obtain as much grant funding as possible to implement these projects.
Is there a possibility that we will not need all 4 million because we are so successful with our grant opportunities?
It is possible we will not need the 4 million. However, the 4 million is needed for us to front the money on the work on a lot of these. And so some of the work in the 4 million is from the water fund, other is through the grant funding program.
Okay. Oh, so it's not out of, oh, okay. They need the contract at those amounts, even if it isn't enterprise money.
Correct. Correct.
Thank you for clarifying. That was the missing piece. So thank you for that. What is, I don't normally talk about this, but what is the wage requirements on this? Is it minimum living wage, or is there a standard we impose on the contractor?
Stacey, do you have that information?
Yes, it would be typical of any city contract. We require the prevailing wage and living wage.
Okay. Thank you for that. And then are we getting any mitigation credit for any of this work, or is any of this work a follow-up to a previous mitigation project in which we're responsible for ongoing maintenance? Or is this just day-to-day routine operations?
We are not obtaining any mitigation credit for the work that's done. None of the work under this contract is being used to meet any of our regulatory mitigation obligations either.
This is just routine. Okay. I did want to pick up on one of the comments by one of the callers. Because of decisions of past administrations, PUD owns a lot of land that really isn't connected with our watersheds and are in closer proximity to our urban footprint and create urban wildland interfaces. And I think that's where the caller was going. So to what degree would any of this be usable to look at where we have those urban wildlands, interfaces, and folks are hoping that the city will step up or PUD will step up to do brush management?
We could utilize this contract for fuel load reduction and brush management activities. The Del Dios area is one that frequently comes up that our department is contacted for, and we could utilize this contract to assist with that work.
And would you be looking for the public to contact PUD or for the council offices to alert PUD to perhaps problematic areas?
Always. We are always open to hear from you and from the community. Absolutely.
Okay. I think I'm familiar with that company. I know they have a very good reputation. So none of this is reflective, just to kind of make sure we're dotting the I's and crossing the T's. So I'll wait to hear from the comments from my other two colleagues. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember LaCava. Councilmember Kate.
Move the item, Mr. Chair.
We have a motion from Councilmember Kate Before I second, I will. I just have one more question. I think colleagues here have asked a lot of good ones. Kelly, I think one of the things that is standing out, if I understand that it's specialized work, but it seems like it's a lot of work as well. And so I guess one of the things that is, it's not specific to your department by any means. It seems to happen throughout the city. Is where it seems like we're teetering on, or probably could definitely use city staff, the permanent city staff, to do some of this work, but end up contracting out. It's just not a small contract. So I'm curious if you could just kind of provide some insight for us here. If we were working in the ideal circumstance, would this be work that was contracted out? Is it that specialized, or if again a magic wand was waved and we were living in an ideal world, would these be city workers doing this work instead?
I think it's a great question and a good concern. I think I mentioned earlier, we have existing city staff that do a majority of the work that's really necessary to operate and maintain these lands. We have lakes construction staff, reservoir keepers, entire teams on our water production division that manage these lands, in addition to environmental staff who are there doing biological surveys and supporting them in that way. The work under this contract, although it sounds like a lot, is not work that we do on a daily basis. I feel that it would be difficult to staff up for specialized projects if the work wasn't consistent throughout the year or throughout the 3.5-year period. It's done in batches, starts and stops, and is not as frequent as the daily management of our reservoir lands. So I do think that this contract strikes a nice balance between the city staff that we have that manages our lands, and then these projects that we do, again, primarily initiated from these grant opportunities with the contract.
Got it. Thank you, Kelly. Well, I will second, but I will also say that I think that Councilmember Von Wilpert and Councilmember LaCava raised some really important questions. I do very much hope that the concerns that have been raised are addressed when this comes to council. So I will second. With that, we will take a vote. So it's a motion from Councilmember Kate and a second by myself. I will now call the roll. Vice Chair Von Wilpert.
Thank you very much. I still have a bunch of questions, but since we're just at committee, I will reluctantly vote yes to forward this today, but I'm not prepared to vote yes on it at full council until I hear more about the herbicides and things like that that we're planning to use. And also just to make sure that, I'm aware of the brush management strategies going around the watersheds in Rancho Bernardo and San Pasqual. And I don't know if you cover Miramar area as well, but that's obviously a big part of our district as well. So yeah, we will set up a time to reach out to your office before it comes to full council, and I will vote yes.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Councilmember LaCava. Councilmember, you're muted.
All right.
You probably caught that from me.
That's right. I think I've been convinced by Councilmember Von Wilpert on the argument, but my strategy is to vote no. I would support moving this to full council without a recommendation, so we can make sure we get locked in on the questions of pesticides and herbicides. I suspect PUD probably has this more in hand than we're able to discern in this conversation, but I'm going to put a no vote in there just as a little bit of a placeholder. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Kate.
Yes.
Thank you. I will also cast a yes vote. So with a motion from Councilmember Kate, a second by myself, that passes 3-1. We will now take up the informational agenda. Brendan, can you please introduce item number 2?
Item 2, presentation by the independent budget analyst, analysis of the fiscal impact of the People's Ordinance. The public comment period for this is now open. If you have already joined the Zoom webinar online or by phone, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. If you are watching on City TV or the live stream online, you would like to call into the meeting to speak, please call 1-669-254-5252 when prompted. Input webinar ID 160-532-0355 #. To raise your hand to speak, select the raise your hand button or press *9. Chair.
Thank you, Brendan. Staff, for this item, please introduce yourselves to the record and let us know how much time you will need.
Sure. Thank you very much, Chair Ella Rivera and members of the Environment Committee. My name is Jordan Moore. I am a policy analyst, fiscal and policy analyst with the Office of the Independent Budget Analyst. We'll need about 20 minutes to go through our presentation today.
Thank you, Jordan. Please proceed.
Excellent. So again, my name is Jordan Moore, and I am the analyst with the Office of the Independent Budget Analyst, who drafted our most recent report titled Analysis of the Fiscal Impact of the People's Ordinance. This report was generated off of a request from Councilmember Ella Rivera, who on July 14th sent a memo to our office requesting an analysis on fiscal and policy impacts. A specific request you can see in detail on the slide. It included the current general fund impact for FY 2022, as well as past impacts and future financial impacts. Policy questions included questions around city bonding capacity and zero waste goals. And the memo also requested analysis on other cities, including service levels and fees charged, as well as generalized demographic data on who receives services from the city under the People's Ordinance. This time, our office would like to thank the staff of the Environmental Services Department for their assistance with this report. They were very timely and open to answering all of our questions and doing so thoroughly and on time. And we really could not have done this report without the assistance of that department. So before moving into the analysis, it's also good to sort of ground the conversation in what is the People's Ordinance and what does it say? The People's Ordinance is the part of the San Diego Municipal Code that was passed by ballot measure initially in 1919 and then subsequently amended by voters in 1981 and 1986 that directs city staff to collect refuse for no charge. So the municipal code in particular, and we have this in our report, both directs city forces to collect what it terms residential refuse, as well as prevent city forces from collecting non-residential refuse. So it is not just a directive that the city do one service level, but it actually creates this bifurcation by limiting the city's ability to do anything else. The term residential refuse is also what dictates who is able to receive these city services. And in general, it's defined as refuse generated from a residence that can be placed at the curb line in specified containers. It's important to note that non-residential refuse per the municipal code is literally defined as everything else. So the way that the People's Ordinance does work is that if a residence can get their refuse into city collected cans and can bring that to a public street, they are eligible to receive this service. What you hear is mostly that it's a single family versus multifamily issue, but it's important to note not all multifamily residences do not receive the services. Some do if they're small enough that they can handle their trash through the city cans. Also, not all single families receive services through the city, especially if those single family homes are on private streets, whether it's through gated communities owned by HOAs, etc. What the impact of this policy is that some city residents receive free trash collection services or receive trash collection services without paying additional fees, because those services are paid for by the general fund, while other residences and all commercial businesses must pay for private haulers to come provide them with residential services. In this way, this service is one of the only services funded by the general fund that does not confer a general benefit. Most general fund services, as you know, libraries, parks, roads, fire protection, these are general benefit services, whereas trash collection is a service only for specific residents. Why this issue seems to be coming up more right now, as you all will remember from the budget discussions, California State Law 1380, SB 1383 will now require all refuse collectors to also add the collection to organic materials to their service lines. So what this really means is that right now, where most places only have 2 lines of service, both refuse and recycling, and in some also provide a third yard waste, that third yard waste stream is going to include all food refuse, and it's going to go from voluntary to mandatory. What this means for the city is that some yard waste services are only available to certain residents. In fact, only about 45,000 out of the estimated 285,000 residences currently have the automated cart yard waste services. So the city will now need to expand that service from those 45,000 and also expand service to anyone else who does yard waste through cans or has no yard waste service at all. All 285,000 residents are going to need a third automated can to be picked up by city staff. The current adopted budget includes $7 million in general funds to begin the implementation of the expansion of this service. And the service is being funded by the general fund because it is considered a mandatory refuse collection service. So moving on to the first question, the impact for FY 2022 of the People's Ordinance and General Funds is $43.2 million. This is mostly made up of the general fund budget for the Collection Services Division. It also includes an extra $400,000 this year. This is one-time funding for route optimization software that is included in the budget. And that's how you get to 43.2. However, as we note in the report, it's not just the general fund that pays for these services. There's up to about $71.8 million in services that the city provides using an array of funds that could be covered under a trash fee if it were not for the People's Ordinance. Most of this is in the recycling fund, as the recycling fund at 19.2 million picks up the collection related to the collection of the blue bins, as well as some of the yard waste services that are available now. You'll also see recycling processing costs and other items in the recycling fund. Things under the refuse disposal fund include things like free Christmas tree collection services and other hazardous material services. And then finally, automated container fund. This is a fund the city already has where residents pay for new containers. This is a service that in some cities is also provided under a base trash fee. As far as question 2, for projecting out into the out years, we use a similar method as to what the Department of Finance uses for their 5-year financial outlook, and mostly looked at the collection services budget because those are the ones that are that you can project out into the out years. You can see the impact on the slide below. Also integrating new SB 1383 costs into next year. It's important to note a lot of the SB 1383 we saw this year, about 6 of that 7 million are one-time capital costs, but then once you get into FY 2023, that's when ongoing staffing costs, costs for trucks and all those other things, that's when they are going to come in as the service goes online. We also note that there are some potential costs not included in this presentation so far because they are unknown at this time. One big one is that currently yard waste and organics go to the Miramar Greenery, which is designed as a yard waste facility. As more food waste comes into the waste stream, ESD has noted that they will need to stand up an organics processing facility to be more both effective and efficient and also comply with state standards. But this new facility will have a higher cost than the greenery and will potentially require higher tipping fees than the current greenery does. That could increase costs in the out years to the general fund as this new facility comes online. Previous costs, this looks at actual spending from FY 2017 to 2021, again, focusing mostly on the collection services budget. And you see about $173 million in general funds were spent in the last 5 years, another $87.5 million out of the recycling fund. And it's also important to note the recycling fund, as we note in the report, is funded through a combination of AB 939 fees. These are tipping fees specifically related for recycling, as well as recycling materials sales. But those material sales have declined. We have started to see some fiscal pressures on the recycling fund as well. Question 4 asked about any impact of amending the people's ordinance to allow for a charge on the city's bonding capacity. We note that this is kind of a nuanced issue, and so we took it in two different directions. One is that if the people's ordinance is amended, any new refuse collection fee is levied. This would set up a potential new enterprise fund, similar to how the Public Utilities Department has water and sewer funds. And when this is set up and a cost of service study goes through, that cost of service study would look at things such as operations, as well as the cost of debt and bonding if it is required. And those costs could be included under a fee that could be approved by council at a later date. We do, however, note that refuse collection services are not typically a capital intensive activity, definitely not at the level of the Public Utilities Department. We have seen some additional capital costs for environmental services recently, but we note that this is mostly related to the ramp up of a new service, and it's not something that we typically see on a year-to-year basis. For the general fund, you would see a reduction in city operating expenses through the imposition of a service fee, and in that, those new general funds could be used to service debt costs associated with new capital improvement bonds. It's important to note that alternatively, these services could also be used to annually provide new or higher levels of public service, other activities, or some combination of both. And we'll also note that as the 5-year outlook comes out, previous outlooks had noted deficits in the out years, and that general funds might be needed to cover current services deficits. All of these decisions would have to be made by the City Council through the annual budget process as it goes forward. So it is difficult at this time to know the actual impact of bonding capacity. For zero waste, it's important to note the city does have a goal to divert 100% of the waste away from the landfill by 2040. But it's also important to note, as I mentioned, the city forces only handle a certain part of the trash space within the city. It's mostly those who are eligible for city forces collection. Based on landfill deposits, that's only about 30% of the amount of waste deposited in the landfill. The other 70% is picked up by franchise haulers who service either multifamily, commercial, or private residential street family homes. However, there are some impacts the department pointed out to us in our discussions, and we grouped these into 3 general issues. The first is that there is a lack of knowledge about the customer base. The Environmental Services Department mostly has a list of addresses on its customers. It does not have other identifying information because it does not need to maintain a billing system for these customers. What this does is it prevents the department from doing outreach that other private franchise haulers can do that have updated billing information, including phone numbers, email addresses, and other types of communication. The department only can communicate through people via the mail. And so there has been expressed interest in having more open communication with customers, especially as we ramp up a new level of service, both for enforcement measures as well as for educational outreach. A second impact is about service levels. Most, and we'll get into this when we get into the other cities analysis, but most cities that provide for refuse collection pick up all refuse collection streams on a weekly basis, not just refuse, but also recycling and yard waste, green waste, or organics if those cities already have that service. Currently, the city only does the black bin on a weekly basis, but does recycling and yard waste on a bi-weekly basis. What this means is that customers sometimes are not incentivized to participate in our waste diversion because if they know that the recycling is not going to get picked up for another week, the recycling bin is too full, they might just throw trash away into the regular bin because they know that will get picked up in the next couple of days as opposed to waiting over a week. With a fee, you could cover the cost of doing weekly collection like many other cities do, and that can improve your participation in these waste diversion programs. And finally, without a fee, it also limits the department's ability to implement what we call as volume-based pricing or pay-as-you-throw. Now, I'll go into this more on the next slides, but the basic terminology is that cities have now moved to a method where they charge customers differently depending on the size of their cans. And it's basically the idea that the smaller refuse cans you have, the less you are charged because you're putting less stress on the system, but it also improves waste diversion by making people think about what cans they're going to place stuff in. For the other cities, we tried to do a comparison that is mostly single-family monthly rates to other single-family monthly rates. So none of the data in here includes rates on multifamily or commercial services, although some of these entities do provide those services. These are only based their single-family rate structures. Cities do a wide variety of services. They do a wide variety of fee models. What we note is, especially on this slide, these 4 large cities are the cities that currently use actual city forces similar to the city of San Diego. The city of Los Angeles currently has a one-style model, but the other 3 cities have what we would call examples of volume-based pricing. This includes Fresno, Long Beach, and Sacramento. And what you can see here is the sort of base fee per month for refuse, the size of a can that fee gets you, and then if there are additional charges for recycling, green waste, and other things that you get. The other thing that we would note is that almost all of the cities we looked at also offer bulky pickup services. These are services that can either be done by appointment or they're done on a scheduled basis, where city services come to homes and collect large items that do not fit in the can from those homes. That is currently a service that the city of San Diego does not provide. So it's important to note. The other thing I would note too is that some of these cities also operate similarly to the city of San Diego, such as Fresno and in certain respects Sacramento, where city forces handle the single family home collections, but they still depend on private franchise haulers to do multifamily or commercial collections as well. This slide is just sort of the second half of the table, noting even more examples of how different fee structures can be done. San Jose and San Francisco, we note, do use franchise haulers, although they're slightly different. San Francisco actually uses a nonprofit entity to conduct their franchise services. And then we also added the city of Phoenix just to show that even outside the state of California, you will see large cities typically charge single family homes for these services. The last question asked about generalized demographic data. And again, we note that while most single family homes receive collection services from the city and most multifamily homes do not, actual residents receiving city services does not map perfectly to this data. And it is very difficult to know exactly how it does map. That said, for the sake of answering this question, our office utilized a source known as the Sandag Data Surfer. This is a data depository run by Sandag with estimates done by Sandag staff based on census data as well as other data sources from the state, county assessor, and other entities. We do note that in talking with them, they note that if they are using census data, they're still using 2010 census data. So when they get the 2020 census data and incorporate it into their estimates, some of these data estimates might change. But what we provided here on this table is a breakdown of the type of housing unit, trying to find that match between which units would receive services and which ones don't. And then the far right side of the chart shows the proportion of single families within each district. So when we move to the next slide, this will be the purple bar that you will see. So when we go to the next slide, this mostly shows our generalized demographic data. So what we've captured in this one chart is the proportion of households that are single family within each district, as well as citywide, the percentage of citywide single-family households by each district compared to the percentage of citywide housing units. And then we also did 2 demographic factors on this as well, including the percentage of population identifying as ethnic minority and the percentage of households below 100K in income. We chose the 100K because that was the nearest breakpoint in the data to what the county area median income is. What we saw in this data is that many council districts profile similarly to the citywide. Citywide, about 52.6% of households are single family. Many districts were right around that number. We do note in the report some of the few caveats. The only 2 districts below 50% are District 1 at 47 and District 3 at 26. And then there are 3 districts that are well above 50, being District 4, District 5, District 6. The other thing to note is that single family units are relatively evenly spread, or at least track with the amount of housing units that are within each district. And finally, that the income and ethnicity data track varyingly across various districts as well. So you'll see districts that might have a similar income or demographic profile or have similar housing profiles don't necessarily match each other. For instance, District 4 and District 5 have the closest single-family housing proportions, but have very different demographic data. Same things with District 7, District 8, similar housing proportions, different demographic data, etc. So finally, in conclusion, we know these are items that we note in the report, but this is just for council for your advisement as you may move forward on this issue. Amending the People's Ordinance to allow for the charging of a fee would require voters to approve an amendment to the municipal code through a ballot measure. And this would require majority approval and would need to be the first step taken before any fees could be charged for this service. After a successful ballot measure, staff would then need to procure a consultant and begin a cost of service study and fee setting process in line with Propositions 218 and 26 process. And we would note this would be a similar process to how sewer and water fees are set. In fact, under Proposition 218, the property related charges that are exempted from going to another citywide vote when they're set are sewer, water, and refuse collection services. So even under 218, refuse collection is treated the same way as sewer and water services are. And finally, we would note that this process could take potentially 24 months to complete before new fee structures develop, and that 24 months would start after a successful ballot measure is actually adopted. And so with that, I will conclude my presentation. And as always, we are happy to answer any questions that the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jordan. Yeah, really appreciate the analysis there. Brendan, do you want to take public comment?
Yes, we will now proceed to public comment. To raise your hand to speak, select the raise your hand button or input *9. When I let you know it's your turn to speak, unmute yourself by either selecting the unmute button or by inputting *6. We have 14 speakers currently in the queue. The first speaker is Don Kilalui. You can unmute yourself.
Good afternoon. It's actually Michael Zucchett using a colleague's Zoom account. I apologize. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. I just want to appreciate and thank Chair Ela Rivera for your leadership on this issue, for bringing this hearing to the committee today. I really want to thank the IBA. As noted in the written report, the IBA has been quite consistent about this item and keeping it on the front burner, so to speak, in countless reports over the last 10 years, and appreciate that. And the IBA just did a great job of going over all of the merits that are at issue here, from disparities that are present when this is the only major service provided by the general fund that actually confers sort of an exclusive benefit only to a certain number of citizens. The People's Ordinance is going to prevent you from complying with new state mandates related to organic waste. It's challenging for your own zero waste goals. There's opportunities for better service for your constituents in terms of containers and every week pickup. And that's, of course, not to mention that we're the only jurisdiction on God's green earth that doesn't charge to recover the cost of this service. So we would really ask everybody to consider doing the responsible thing that is needed to be done, and now is the time to do it. Give the voters the opportunity to weigh in on this, whether or not this 100-year-old piece of legislation is serving the citizens of San Diego or not. As the IBA has pointed out, there'll be a process after that that will be equally rigorous and long to see what happens after that. But please get this before the voters next year so that we can figure out the path forward and give them the chance. And once again, just really want to thank the chairman for your leadership on this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, Luis, he, him, his.
Good afternoon, Chair Ela Rivera and members of the Environment Committee. My name is Luis Montedo Adams. Pronouns are he, him, his. On behalf of the San Diego LGBT Community Center and as a member of the Community Budget Alliance, I'm calling to voice the Center's support of reviewing the People's Ordinance as a possible new revenue source for the City of San Diego. Earlier this year in February, the City Council voted to apply an equity lens to its future budgetary considerations. With an ever-growing budget deficit, we must take steps now to ensure communities in San Diego are no longer left behind. It is not enough to simply acknowledge the disparities between San Diego's wealthiest and poorest neighborhoods, but this moment requires bold action in making the necessary policy changes to ensure a San Diego for all. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you to the IBA for their presentation.
Thank you. Next speaker, Rodney L. Fowler, Sr. Rodney, you're our next speaker. You can unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you to the council members and thank you to the staff that put this presentation together. I'm a lifelong city resident, retired from the city of San Diego in April of this year after 33 years of service. And I spent my whole career as a refuse collector that actually went and picked up the cans at the residence for the city of San Diego. This issue has come up over the years over and over again. And as the prices of real estate increase in all over Southern California, but especially here in San Diego, the gap between those that have and those that have not is growing. One of the things I appreciated when I was growing up was the middle class and working class people having to be able to have the ability to work, provide for their family, have a house and a residence. And what's increasingly happening more and more as we continue on is that people that are on limited income, they're being priced out of San Diego. And they're being priced out of San Diego because of bills. The prices increase over and over again. All we need to do as San Diego's residents is look at the situation that happens in the water department with an audit. Every few years, we run into this situation where we find out that the water department has been collecting money. It hasn't been spent on what was originally requested for. And I believe that we don't want to run into that same problem with this situation. This was a benefit that our forefathers thought of. I think the city has to go back and think outside of the box and find a way to analyze the situation. There's no doubt that as residents increase the city grows, that we will have problems managing refuse, open space, police and fire protection, libraries. That's a constant situation that you have to adjust to as your population grows. Many cities around the country already use the benefit of collecting refuse as a fee. And because
I'm sorry, Rodney, you've used your 2 minutes. I'm gonna have to move on next speaker, but appreciate your comments. Next speaker is Kim Knox, she, her.
Good afternoon. I'm Kim Knox, president of the League of Women Voters of San Diego. The League believes that the government should maintain an equitable and flexible system of taxation. We support policies to reduce the generation of solid waste and to promote reuse and recycling. We support the city's zero waste plan and the climate action plan. The People's Ordinance prevents the city from imposing trash hauling fees for certain residents. It is unfair that all other San Diegans must pay for this service through their taxes and by hiring a private hauler. The IBA report says that the city's cost to pick up trash, recycling, and organics will rise significantly in order to comply with increased state requirements of SB 1383. And without income from trash hauling, the city has limited ability to fund education on reducing, reusing, recycling, and on programs such as Pay As You Throw. The city should treat all residents the same with respect to public services. We ask that the City Council allow San Diegans to vote on a ballot measure to revise the People's Ordinance to fairly distribute the cost of trash hauling among all residents and businesses. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 10 speakers in the queue. Our next speaker is Amina, she, her, hers.
Hi, my name is Laura Minna Cho, and I volunteer with the San Diego Green New Deal Alliance, and I strongly support reforming the People's Ordinance. So a couple of years ago, I called up the city's trash department to set up the service. The city employee was very nice, but she mentioned I did not have to pay for this service. You see, I'm a homeowner, and I responded with a cool, thanks. But I didn't realize that others did not have to pay. I thought everybody was getting this service for free. I also never realized how much my trash was costing. even to this day, and it's a pretty big can. And I also didn't realize that I was putting my trash burden on others, but that's not cool and we need to change. We need a transparent system that applies universally to everyone, where the more you trash, the more you gotta pay cash. We need a pay-as-you-throw system. And as you know from this presentation today and from the past 2008 San Diego County Grand Jury, this ordinance is inequitable. It's completely unfair and unjust to put some citizens, basically homeowners, above the rest of the citizen base, which is basically renters and apartment dwellers, because not all people can afford or even want a home. The city punishes them for not having a home through this fee. Please recommend to the City Council to place a measure on the ballot reforming this ordinance to make the system fair and transparent to all, where the more you trash, the more you got to pay cash. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Jesse Connor.
Jesse Connor, President, San Diego City Firefighters, Local 145. I speak in support of item 2. The report casts light on an issue that should be addressed by city leaders. The bifurcated system in which some San Diegans pay for trash and others do not is unfair, and it creates a financial burden for all taxpayers. This outdated provision requires the city to absorb a continually increasing cost. It may have made sense in 1919, as it was clearly a priority for residents at the time, but a lot has changed. The city has significantly increased programs and services for citizens since, and absent offsetting fees, this cost is borne by the general fund and competes with public safety. Fire protection, rescue, emergency medical service provided to San Diegans are not paid from an enterprise account or special fee. They're also paid from the general fund. The city commissioned independent Citygate studies in 2010 and again in 2017, which found that San Diego Fire Rescue is not meeting the city's goals and response times due to insufficient fire stations throughout the city. San Diego spends less per capita on fire protection and EMS than most other large cities. The San Diego Fire Department also has no permanent training facility. It is on the cusp of losing the temporary facility, NTC, due to the city's Pure Water project. Also, San Diego firefighters are not paid competitive wages to recruit and retain diversity. We've known about these challenges for over a decade, yet there's still no comprehensive plans to overcome them. And the primary reason is cost to the general fund. What are the city goals to address long deferred fire rescue needs so that we may effectively protect San Diego? How will the city fund these needs? Is refuse collection a greater priority than public safety? Well, this is a question that citizens should get to answer. No one likes increased fees, especially if they don't understand how or where the money is going to be spent. But what people don't like more is a cut to essential services because a problem is allowed to continue until it becomes an emergency. Honorable Council, you have a tough job, and I sympathize with your positions. I believe you have a duty to inform, educate, and seek solutions for San Diegans. Firefighters support exploring a change to an outdated ordinance, and we encourage you to take this issue to the voters for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. Next speaker, Louis Rodolico.
Good afternoon. According to ESD's budget data for fiscal year 2018, city trash service costs $34 million from the general fund. The ESD website estimates there are approximately 289,000 residents in service weekly. That works out to $10 a month. A good job. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I put the link to this data in today's printed comments. Privatizing trash will cost the average homeowner much more. Privatizing trash will help create more homeless and be a source of even further income inequality. Necessities should never be in the corporate domain. We see what happens when corporations took on the necessities of healthcare and medications. Corporations cannot help themselves, and they are bound to the profits of their shareholders, boards, CEOs, lobbyists, and other agents. Keep corporations and their dark money away from our refuge collection system, regardless of what you do. They always seem to find a way to beat up the lowest income households and generate more homeless. Do not give corporations another way to ruin the credit of homeowners caught up in their intentionally complex collections. Now, when we decided to buy a home years ago, the condo purchase did not include trash service. The single home price did, and that raised the house value, thereby increasing the municipal tax revenue from the house we purchased. I do not like seeing politicians, lobbyists, and other agents painting house owners as cheats. We made a choice in which there was no malicious intent. The city starts charging yearly trash rates on single home owners. Will the property taxes go down in proportion? My guess is no, since bureaucratic fiscal mechanisms ratchet in only one direction. Single-family homeowners should not be penalized. And if we are, the additional costs should not be justified as having had dealt with those willing to cheat the system. We must confront any attempt, no matter how vague or misintended, but any attempt to divide us, which is what I'm seeing here. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Kira Pina O'Laughlin.
Hi, Chair Elo Rivera and the rest of the Environment Committee. Thank you for covering this topic today. My name is Kiara Pina O'Laughlin. I'm with the Center on Policy Initiatives and the Community Budget Alliance. The IBA report found that the People's Ordinance has cost the city over $216 million in the last 5 years, including $30 million each year from the general fund. This cost benefits roughly half of San Diego residents, while the other half, 55% of residents are renters in the city and have to, the cost is transferred to them as far as paying for refuse services. The People's Ordinance also limits climate action plan implementation, such as zero waste goals. These are inhibited due to the lack of information on households receiving services in order to do outreach on new policies and educational materials, low service levels due to limited funding, and limits on implementing pay-as-you-throw programs, which incentivize consumers to use less waste. Our city budget should allocate money in ways that will provide long-term solutions with a commitment to equity. Every San Diegan should be able to thrive in a healthy environment, live in a safe and affordable housing, secure jobs, and equitably access city services. For this reason, we support exploring potential revenue options as long as any proposed changes ensure waste and recycling jobs stay as city jobs and are not outsourced or privatized. Achieving budget equity and improving the lives of San Diegans we advocate for every day is a priority so that San Diego can become a city that works better for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, San Diego Green New Deal.
Good afternoon. This is Bertha Rodriguez calling on behalf of Climate Action Campaign, a member of the San Diego Green New Deal Alliance. We urge the city to revise the People's Ordinance to address longstanding inequities in the city's zero waste policies and provide critical funds for city needs, including implementing the Climate Action Plan's zero waste measures. Right now, the People's Ordinance requires renters and apartment dwellers to pay for trash services, while those in single-family homes receive the service for free. This is an inequitable citywide practice, with generally lower-income residents subsidizing the cost for higher-income residents. Meanwhile, largely due to the lack of funding, the city is behind on its Climate Action Plan zero waste goals, which continues to exacerbate the layer harm to communities of concern. Revising the People's Ordinance provides the perfect opportunity to reconcile these two injustices. Again, we urge you to advise the City Council to place a measure on the ballot to amend the ordinance and impose a variable rate trash service fee. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Ron Askeland.
Hello, this is Dr. Ronald Askeland. I'm chair of the San Diego Sierra Club Zero Waste Subcommittee, and I'm speaking in favor of amending the People's Ordinance. Two of our key goals on the zero waste team are reducing methane emissions from food waste going into landfills and decreasing the amount of material going into landfills by reduce, reuse, and recycling. Revising the People's Ordinance to pay as you throw would free up funds for diverting organics and reduce the amount of material going into landfills. It also eliminates the trash hauling subsidy for primarily single-family homes. The San Diego Sierra Club's Executive Committee will be reviewing this proposal and then taking a position on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Sally Small.
Hello again. I'm with Emerald Hills Neighborhood Council, Choyas Creek Coalition, Choyas Valley Community Planning Group. Living in D4, we are the highest number. 78% of our homes are single family residents. whether we're homeowners or renters. A lot are on limited incomes. So we appreciate the idea of making the changes, but we hope that as other utilities, we would be able to get discounts for low income. And that should also apply with the apartment dwellers too, but that's another subject. Paying as you throw is necessary for us to be able to meet our zero waste goals and the clean action plan. Unfortunately, as it is now in our area, many people do not have even blue trash cans, let alone green ones, and they can't afford to have replacements. And many of the original trash cans are in really poor shape. So if the city's going to be doing it and charging it, then we need to make sure we get much better service. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Dana Givett.
Thank you. My name is Dana Givett. I support putting the People's Ordinance on the ballot as an initiative, but I have a question for Council Member Elo Rivera. You said in an article in the Voice of San Diego that the city sees no legal avenue to charge those who are renting their homes as short-term vacation rentals. And I would really appreciate an explanation on that. I read that we're spending and have been spending approximately $2 million a year to collect garbage from short-term vacation rentals. And I know that there's a 2019 lawsuit that was filed to stop that from happening, but I do not know if that lawsuit has been reconciled. As I read the People's Ordinance, it says that the city is not obligated to collect garbage from transient occupancy residences. So I would really appreciate a response to this and an explanation of why there is no legal avenue for the city to be collecting, not to be collecting garbage from the short-term vacation rentals at a cost of $2 million or more per year to the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker is a phone number ending 5120. You can unmute yourself by dialing *6.
Hi, my name is Nicole Remacher. I'm a third-generation San Diegan, a young professional and new homeowner. I bought a house in San Diego this past year in one of the worst housing markets we've seen in recent decades for a young person. My concern with the repeal of the People's Ordinance is that homeowners were just recently singled out for a phased-in water rate increase that was over 30%, and now you're singling them out again to impose a new trash fee. The issue seems to be over the impacts to the general fund, for which one of the major, most stable revenue sources for general government services is property taxes, which homeowners are a big part of. Now, I understand Proposition 13's initial intent to limit property taxes, as well as some of the equity issues. I work on this area myself in municipal finance. But when I received my tax bill yesterday, I remember that I pay over $10,000 in property taxes, while a lot of my neighbors pay half that, maybe less, maybe more. It just depends on, when they bought their home. And so despite receiving the significant tax break, they're not necessarily seniors or the types of groups that Prop 13 was supposed to support. They're just lucky with real estate market timing, leaving me frustrated and the general fund revenues greatly diminished. Now, is that property tax system equitable? My neighbors and I receive the same services, but I'm subsidizing their tax bill because I bought my home during a housing crisis perpetuated by the city and the state and their policies, which caused high real estate prices for which the property tax is assessed in the first place. So we should really be taking a look at Proposition 13, state advocacy, analyzing the inequity in this massively impactful legislation over generations, such as shifting this massive loss of property tax revenue to increases in sales tax, other regressive local taxes, and fees to low-income populations to fill this gap. Thank you.
Thank you. We have another phone number ending 5113. You can unmute yourself by dialing *6. Looks like you're on mute. You can provide your comments.
Hi, my name is Andy Kopp, and I'm a resident of downtown, and I'm calling in today to support repealing the people's ordinance, or at a minimum, giving the voters an opportunity to weigh in on this decision. As you're hearing over and over again, there's a lot of confusion with the public as to how the general fund receives its revenue, what it's spent on, and getting out early on this issue, as Councilmember Ela Rivera has done, gives us an opportunity to frame the conversation in a way that allows people to understand really how their city government works. For too long, we have crafted a cheap city where a lot of residents expect a lot of services, in fact, world-class services, for cheap. And that's simply not how the world works. We have to pay for the services that we want. And right now we have a glaring inequity facing most of the renters, or excuse me, multifamily home dwellers in this city. Repealing the People's Ordinance gives us an opportunity to provide a clear-eyed vision for what this money will be spent on. And that kind of clarity gives confidence to voters to say yes to new revenues. So I hope you'll extend this and push it to the full city council so we can get this on the ballot in 2022. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Allison Schlick. You can unmute yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is Allison Schlick. I'm a part of the group Zero Waste San Diego, and I'm also an environmentalist. I want to be clear, there were some concerns raised by homeowners about their bills, and I'm a homeowner, and we have bills, we have taxes, but just putting this trash measure to the voters to weigh in is just going to allow our city to have a say in a regressive tax. That really, I was just looking at the PowerPoint that the city analyst provided. I mean, this was meant for residential refuse collection, and yet somehow over the years, residents don't include people that could benefit from free trash service. So, like apartment dwellers, and those are residents. Unfortunately, going in the other direction and making it free for everybody is not fiscally responsible, nor would it help us align our municipal trash pickup to the state guidelines and the climate action plan and the zero waste plan. But I just want to point out that just putting this to the voters and getting it passed and getting the People's Ordinance repealed just allows the city to charge $1, right? Right now, we are preempted from charging even, 50 cents. It doesn't necessarily mean, there's going to be a whole fee setting process and cost. And I do support a utility waiver for those that are very low income. So I just wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Karina Gonzalez.
Good afternoon, Chair Ela Rivera and committee members. My name is Karina Gonzalez, and I am with Hammond Climate Solutions. I strongly support revising the People's Ordinance. Reforming this ordinance can allow the city to collect additional revenue that can be used to help support and fund actions in the city's climate action plan and resiliency plan, and to fund necessary infrastructure projects across the city. I urge you to advise the City Council to place a measure on the ballot to revise this ordinance and consider imposing a variable rate trash service fee. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Jeff Huter. Can you unmute yourself?
I'm Jeff Huter. As long as we're recognizing the shortfall in our city's budget and we're looking for additional ways to raise revenue, I think one of the areas, and it's fine to put the People's Ordinance on the ballot. Certainly the city residents should have the right to make decisions about these kind of changes. But the other thing the city has done without putting it in front of the voters is it's enacted things like the city's ADU ordinance and incorporated into it the waiving of developer fees that aren't required by the state of California. And reimposing those fees would be an excellent way to raise more money for infrastructure projects in the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. That concludes public comment on this item.
Thank you, Brendan, and thank you to all the members of the public for participating here. As a reminder, this is an information item only, so no motion will be required. This analysis was conducted in response to a request put forward by the District 9 office, so I will respectfully use the chair's prerogative here to speak first on this item, and at the conclusion of my questions and comments, I will gladly turn it over to my colleagues. Again, I want to emphasize my sincere appreciation to the IPA for conducting what we believe to be the most comprehensive analysis of the People's Ordinance that the city has ever done. I very, very much appreciate how responsive you've been to our extremely lengthy list of questions to investigate. And, sorry, Jordan and Jeff, but I'm going to actually start here by asking a few more questions because one of the things I've found over the last week or so is that folks get very confused very, very quickly as far, when it comes to this ordinance, what it requires, what it doesn't, the way it does and does not tie the city's hands. So if you will bear me the opportunity, I've got a series of questions for you that are mostly just yes or no, just so we can provide some clarity here. So one of the things that we've noticed is that there's a common response from people receiving the free city-provided refuse collection, and that is that they already pay for it through property taxes that are deposited in the general fund. However, residents and businesses who cannot receive free city-provided collection also pay into the general fund through various taxes, fees, and payments. Generally speaking, that is true, correct?
Correct.
Great. And that, despite that, people who cannot receive city-provided refuse collection are forced to pay for a private company to dispose of their trash. So in practice, people who do not receive city-provided refuse collection are paying twice for their trash disposal. They indirectly pay for city-provided refuse collection that they're not currently receiving, and then they pay directly to a private hauler for their own trash collection. Is that correct?
It is correct. They do pay for private refuse collection, and most residents are paying into general fund taxes, and the general fund does pay for refuse collection for a specific subset of the city population.
And general fund taxes are not exclusive to property taxes, correct? There's other forms of taxation that feed into that general fund?
Correct. Property taxes are the big one. Sales tax is about half the size of property taxes, and then the other majors, transit occupancy tax and franchise fees.
Got it. Thank you. So is that what led your office to conclude that this service is one of the only services paid for by the general fund that confers an exclusive benefit onto only a subset of city residents?
Basically, yes. When you look at the array of services that the general fund funds and provides, almost all of them are non-exclusive, whereas this one, only you have to maintain certain parameters to receive this service.
Right. Thank you for that. So this is important for us to clarify because unlike a park, the general public does not have equal access to this public service that we all help pay for, and we don't think that that is acceptable. Switching gears to the cost, your report noted that if we switch to a fee model through which city-provided refuse collection would be paid for by users, it would free up general revenues that could be used in a variety of ways. In your report, you found that this amounts to nearly $43 million this fiscal year and roughly $235 million over the next 5 years. Theoretically, could that $235 million be used to invest in services that all residents either benefit from or have equal access to? For example, parks, libraries, road improvements, and more?
Yes, those monies could be reinvested into any general fund services currently provided or new ones that the city council wishes to establish.
Got it. Thank you. And so now we'll shift to the environmental impacts. And your report makes it clear that the People's Ordinance constrains the city's ability to achieve its waste diversion and recycling goals, which we often refer to as our zero waste goals. And as a reminder, these are goals that are part of our climate action plan. This is due in part to our inability to offer services that many other cities do, ranging from weekly collections for all refuse types, bulk item pickup, free bins, the pay-as-you-throw fee model, and educational and outreach programs. This could be either IBA or environmental services staff. Setting aside the specific people's ordinance considerations, do you feel the city would be better equipped to achieve our zero waste and climate action plan goals if we were able to incentivize producing less waste, offer more frequent collection, offer bulk pickup, and better engage residents on diversion programs?
I will start and defer to ESD if they would like to provide more context. But that appears to be the case, not just here, but in many other cities. The reason why these policies are put in place are for waste diversionary techniques. And many cities achieve this through fee structures. If you're not allowed to have a fee structure, you either have to come up with alternative methods of compliance, or you just aren't able to achieve that at all. I don't know if ESD wants to also add anything that they know about best practices from other cities.
Sure. Good afternoon, Chair Elo Rivera, Renee Robertson, Director of the Environmental Services Department. I want to point out and add that SB 1383 will mandate weekly collection, and that is definitely identified as proponent helping to move the zero waste bar for us as well. So in essence, providing weekly collection, providing incentives, and having customer data would all help us to move that zero waste plan faster and farther.
Thank you, Jordan and Renee. I'm really just one quick follow-up on this point. Renee, I'm curious, the system that you're forced to operate in comparison to other cities of our size, to what extent do you feel like that ties your hands as a department in terms of the creativity that you can apply toward achieving our zero waste goals?
That's a great question. I actually think it makes us more creative in many ways. But I think to your point, yes, when you look at what we're operating under in the single family system, which again, I'll point back to, there's a broader non-exclusive franchise system, and really the Environmental Services Department is engaged on both fronts. I think we are at the point where we're hoping that SB 1383 helps to implement programs that could have been conceivably implemented earlier in the process.
Thank you, Renee. So lastly, I want to clear up some misconceptions about a possible ballot measure. One way to address the untenable impacts of the people's ordinance is to amend it through the vote of the people to allow for a fee. So just to be clear, not to impose a fee, not to make a wholesale change to our refuse collection system, not to privatize it, but simply to remove the ban on the charging of fees to untie the city's hands. With this hypothetical in mind, can staff clarify what would have to happen and how long it would take between the successful passage of a measure to allow a fee and the actual charging of a fee?
Sure, I can take the first stab at that. So that's really what our conclusion is. And you are correct. So the first step would be to amend the ordinance to allow for the charging of a fee. If you were to go down this route and your desire was to sort of be able to collect revenue to cover the cost of this service, then staff would need to embark on cost of service studies. The current estimate from ESD, and they can correct me if they think this requires any more information, but that it would take about 12 months to bring on a consultant and another 12 months for that consultant to complete the study. These would all need to follow along the same things as Prop 218, and this council has experience dealing with Prop 218 fee increases. As the sewer fee that just passed. That's basically the same exact process that a refuse collection fee would do. That final act of the fee would take place at City Council. So the ballot measure itself would only be the first step. And depending on how you want to amend it, you can change the people's ordinance to just allow for the charging of a fee. Because as it currently stands right now, the municipal says at no charge.
Right, right. And last question on that front. Is it common for fee models to be implemented gradually to ensure that increased costs are instituted slowly over time?
That is a good question that I do not know the answer to, because we did not look into the history of how many of these things were done. And so I will just say, yeah, we do not know. It is a possibility. And it's also important to note, the one thing I will add is that, it will be in council's discretion on how they want to shape this policy, right? So as you develop the fee and as you gradually bring it on, it is within that council discretion on how you do it, as long as what you're doing is in line with Prop 218. The only thing that we would note is that if you're not collecting enough revenue to cover the cost of the service, we would still need to have either most likely general funds, or the other revenue sources covering this service as anything is gradually brought online. But that is a policy discussion and consideration that the council could consider moving forward.
Got it. Thanks, Jordan. I appreciate that. If I understand correctly, so whether or not it's common practice or not, it's not something that is barred from being able to be done. Last question, and this is for Jeff. No offense, Jeff. I think you've been in the office for a while, and I'm curious how many times that you can recall the IBA pointing this out to City Council.
Well, let's see. We've been in operation for about 15 years now, and I think since I've been here that entire time, it's always been in question. And several times we've been asked to develop reports that talk about revenue options and possibilities to address services or infrastructure needs. And this has frequently come up. And given the inequity and the unique experience that we have here in San Diego, whereas most other agencies throughout the nation charge for it, it has frequently come up, and we've endorsed it for some of those reasons.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that. Your institutional knowledge is important. So I used the phrase untie the city's hands intentionally before, because under the People's Ordinance as written, the city cannot charge free riders and those who exploit this free service. I'm talking about property owners who run mini dorms and short-term vacation rentals, some of the folks who frustrate San Diegans the most. The city cannot charge them, despite their operating their property essentially as a business, and no matter how much trash they generate. Think about that. Out-of-town tourists who stay in some Airbnbs pay nothing for trash, while many renters, condo owners, and local businesses pay twice. My friends in the college area who are consistently frustrated the amount of trash produced in mini dorms, 1,000 beer cans out in front of that house, city can't charge a cent for it. I highlight this because it reiterates what 3 San Diego County grand juries have found and what this IBA analysis has found as well. The People's Ordinance is irresponsible, it is unfair, it is costly, and a major barrier to achieving our environmental goals. Again, it's irresponsible governance, and it has to change. However, I do want to acknowledge the concerns over how new fees can negatively impact the cost of living for folks. Completely understand those sentiments. This is a very expensive place to live. But as we've established here, the charging of fees is years away, and there are steps that we can take to mitigate the impact. The first step that we have to take, though, is simply asking voters to make a change to the language to untie the city's hands. Additionally, a priority of mine is making sure that any proposed solutions and fee model are equitable, ramped up over time, and that there's assistance available to those who need it. But again, we can't even have that policy discussion under the People's Ordinances currently. But hanging over all of this is, will the city council actually place a measure on the ballot to ask voters for a change? I cannot speak, nor would I speak for my colleagues. But what I do know is that stakeholders and advocates, including many of those who we heard from today, have been calling for a change for years. And that time after time, every time an independent analysis of this is done, the law is found to be untenable and completely misaligned with the needs of the 21st century. People's Ordinance prevents us from offering world-class services, from refuse collection to all sorts of other community services. San Diegans deserve better. San Diegans deserve a responsible government that doesn't look the other way when one independent body after the other determines a major policy is indefensible. I'm committed to solving this problem. I look forward to hearing from my colleagues. I appreciate your patience as I asked those many, many questions and spoke for way too long. I will now pass it over to Vice Chair Von Wilbert.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for raising this important discussion. I very much appreciate the IBA's office. Thank you, Jordan and Jeff, for all of your work. And as always, I appreciate what ESD does. Thank you, Renee. I think Matt Cleary is on here as well for all the work that you are all doing to keep our residents cash going and recycling, and now our new SB 1383. Just thank you for all the work you do every day. I just have some questions I want to ask. This is an info item, please, of some of the things I saw in the IBA report, which was very well done. Thanks again for your work. I don't know, Brendan, if you could bring up the slides again, the PowerPoint slides, or somebody could.
Jordan, is that something you're able to do? Okay, thank you.
1 second.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for not asking me to do that. We'd be here all afternoon. I appreciate you. If you could go to slide 6, please.
Go to that.
Perfect. Thank you. So my one question is, we do need to prepare as a city for SB 1383, which under our chairman's leadership for the Environment Committee, I think we've done a really good job of being on top of that and being aware of it as a council. But I am confused about what to me seems like a relatively low number, 6.8 million for the next 5 years to implement SB 1383. And Jordan, I know that you had referenced, we did already authorize quite a big lease revenue bond infrastructure package of $145 million earlier. Part of that will be used to purchase the trucks needed to obtain, to get the services. But if our general fund base budget to pick up trash is 38 million a year, and we have to pick up the same amount of organics from the same households, how is it only 6 million or 7 million a year for organics and 40 million a year for trash? I'm just wondering if someone could, and that may be an ESD question.
So I will start with, and the ESD can fill in some gaps as well. But the main thing is that, and this is kind of what we bring up in this report, when you do these outlooks, the only thing that you can do is that initial known cost. So we know coming in the 23 that 6.8 million is there, and it's going to stay there as you go through. I would say this is the low end of the estimate because, the financial outlook we tried to stay with what DOF would have done had they done this. Also noting that the 5-year financial outlook, they do it on the entire general fund. They don't go department by department necessarily. So we kind of had to make some different assumption choices. But there are things in here too that aren't considered. For instance, past FY 2023, because the bargaining agreements don't go past that, there are no employee raises going out in those out years. We also didn't do the organics processing facility. We also didn't do, some of the current yard waste services that are picked up by the recycling fund will at some point most likely have to switch from the recycling fund into the general fund. But since we don't know the timing of that, similar to the organic facility, we didn't know. So this is really just kind of a conservative low end estimate. And again, we're rolling out a new program. I know in my discussions with the department on this, they also were noting, this is just kind of what we know we have to do to begin. There's many other things that we don't know. And this also doesn't include some of the initial debt service costs that we did as well, right? So it doesn't have the repayments for the trash trucks, the bins, those kinds of things. So there are some things that were not in here because we were not able to work it into the model. So my answer to you would be, this is kind of the low end estimate. This is the stuff that we know we're going to have happen and when it's going to have happen. And then the other question is what else is out there as we move into 24, 25 further years that we don't know at this point. I don't know if anyone from ESD wants to talk about that as well.
Go ahead, Renee.
Sorry, I just wanted to add the department did the best that we could to identify what the other unknown costs could potentially be. And right now we're in the realm where those are potential areas. And then we're in the midst of next year's budgeting process and the 5-year outlook. So there will be some additional asks for positions and things of that nature. But I think Jordan's done a really good job laying it out in the IBA report here for what that baseline is. And unfortunately, when you're implementing something this massive, a total overhaul of how the solid waste system works, there's just going to be some unknown unknowns that won't be known until future years. Very, very respectfully, I say that.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I think that's what we're all grappling with is we are the only city in the state that doesn't get to implement a cost recoverable fee for 1383 because why we're here. So I appreciate that. Also, the recycling fund base budget. Jordan, I know you spoke about it briefly, but with the China's national sword policy, I know we've been able to not sell as much of our recyclables and get money for them as we used to. So do we know how much of like in FY23, the estimate of the recycling fund is going to be general fund or how much revenue we're going to get? I couldn't quite understand where we got the 19 million number.
So the 19 million number is actually part of the collection services budget. So that actually pays for drivers, trucks, and the actual activities of going around and collecting the blue bins on a bi-weekly basis. The important thing with the China National Sword, and you actually can see it here, so that $4.6 million for processing, that's also money that we end up having to pay in order to get, the recycling processed. It's really on the revenue side of the recycling fund where we are seeing the impact of National Sword. So, you have your AB 939 fees that are paid, and you have that, and those revenue sources have covered the recycling fund budget, which covers both processing costs, the actual, land, all the activities that go into recycling, as well as covering the costs of sending drivers out to collect, people's ordinance eligible recycling activities. So, mostly what you're seeing, it's a revenue impact. And if the recycling fund didn't have to pick up that activity, because typically that activity is funded by, the actual collection of it is funded by those entities, that could potentially change the way our recycling fund works. Right now, as those revenues decline, I know that there have been for many years discussions of a potential AB 939 fee increase. We don't want to say whether or not this will necessarily save it because the commodities market, and ESD can tell you as well, vacillates widely. So, the amount of money we're going to pick, it's anyone's guess at this point. That's kind of why we left that processing fee flat as well. But it is a consideration that, the recycling fund is picking up, charges that normally a fee would cover. I will also note that one entity that pays the AB 939 fees into the recycling fund is the general fund, because when general fund services pick up refuse, when they go to dump that refuse at the Miramar landfill, the city does pay a tipping fee for AB 939. So, you could also end, cross subsidization there as well. There are different things that could be done that would have to be done under a cost of service study, but that's just sort of the one consideration there.
Okay, got it. And I don't know how much a cost of service study would be, because is there any wisdom in letting voters know if this is on the ballot, since this is a voter ordinance, this was not a city policy, the people's ordinance, the estimate of how much it would be for each household to pay going forward?
So are you asking for the cost of a cost of service study or a potential fee going forward?
Well, I guess my question is, one, do we have a potential fee going forward, or would we need a cost of service study to even estimate what households would have to pay? Because a question I'm sure we'll get is, this is on the ballot, how much your household's going to have to pay?
Correct. I just wanted to make sure I was understanding correctly.
No, I asked it in a weird way. It's totally not your fault.
No problem. So no, we have not gone through what we would need to go through to come up with a reliable estimate. A cost of service study would need to be done to sort of, definitely nail that down.
Okay.
We can do projections, but it's also important to note that if you were to go and create an enterprise fund in charge, it's more than just taking, these line items that you see on these slides and dividing by the number of residents. There will be other revenue requirements that we'll have to consider as well, such as, what kind of reserve fund does the enterprise fund require? Do we want to change the service levels that are there, and these kinds of things? So there are still a lot of policy questions that would need to be answered before you can estimate a fee. But that is something that I know our office, is, if directed, perspective, we'd be happy to work on moving forward. And if this measure moves forward, we would be working towards some sort of estimate for a ballot measure statement. But at this time, we are not prepared to sort of estimate what that is. Mostly we're, if asked, we would lean to say, we have those examples of other cities and you can see what they charge and they all kind of have a ballpark near each other. And so, that could give you a vague idea, but we haven't gone through the motions that we would need to go to come up with a better estimate for our city at this time.
Okay, got it, understood. And understood about the service levels, because one question I get from a lot of my residents is, why don't we do weekly recycling pickup? Since now that we as a society have learned how to recycle, often the blue bins are overflowing by the time 2 weeks comes around. And so I think that would be, like you said, if we want weekly recycling pickup, that's a different cost of study than what we currently have, and it makes sense to me. So my last thing, and I'll close up, is just that, for viewers out there, it's even more complicated than it seems, because there are regulations that the city has enacted to complicate the people's ordinance even more. So it's, for example, I've got about almost 100 single-family homes that are going to be taken off our trash rolls in Rancho Bernardo, because it turns out they're not on a public street, they're on a private street. And it is unfortunate because it is a senior restricted income area. So, for equity's sake, they do have single-family homes. They are seniors on restricted incomes, but they will no longer be getting trash pickup because they are not on a public street, they're on a private. And that was because of a city regulation in 2010 that affected the people's ordinance. So it's, it is more complicated than it seems, and we'll have to hash that out too. And I know I'm not the only district going through that. We had to rescind service in D2 recently too, based on where the houses were located. So I'm glad we're having this conversation. Really, I know it's so complicated, but making sure we further our environmental goals is incredibly important to me. So thank you to our chair for docketing this, and thank you to Jordan for answering all of our many questions. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Vice Chair. We will now go to Councilmember Kate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I wasn't expecting that. Thank you, Jordan and Office of the IBA for the presentation, and Mr. Kowar. I think this issue probably, along with the other revenue sources, is probably the top two topics that the IBA has analyzed over the last 15 years. And I think in my time on the council, it's probably the third or fourth time I've heard this issue. So appreciate the commitment to this and the continue to work on there. I appreciate your comments, Mr. Chair, in terms of the that we live in a very expensive city, and I think a couple of the public commenters mentioned, and I'm confounded by this notion that we are a cheap city. To be quite honest with you, our housing costs are exorbitant. We pay some of the highest water rates in the country. Our other utilities are some of the highest in the country, and this notion that we're cheap somehow is, I'm just confounded by that. And that's, if we just paid more, the level of service that we're going to be getting would be that much better. I don't get it, to be quite honest with you, but that's just me and my more personal statements. Just a couple of questions, I guess, to start off with, for Jordan or for ESD. For those folks who do pay, whether they're multifamily or business, they are allowed to choose their service provider as long as they are a franchisee with the city of San Diego. Is that correct?
I would have ESD clarify, but yeah, so Renee.
Thanks, Jordan. Yes, great question. That is correct. They are allowed to choose between any of our non-exclusive franchisees.
Okay. So if single-family homeowners begin to pay, they don't have that option, do they?
I'd actually defer that question to the city attorney's office. I think that's a legal question on how the municipal code is written and how it could potentially be amended.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. This is Hilda Mendoza, Deputy City Attorney I would actually ask Deputy City Attorney Nicole Denow if she can answer that question.
Well, that would depend on the amendment that was brought forward.
I'm sorry, I don't know if that's just me. I can barely hear you, Nicole.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is this better?
Not really.
I'm sorry that this is my computer. I'm trying. You know, that's a question that would depend on the type of ballot initiative that came forward.
It depends on the ballot initiative that would come forward. Is that what you said? Okay. I'm going to assume for the sake of argument that we don't get a choice if you're a single family homeowner unless something were to drastically change. But that's just my thoughts on that. In terms of, and it was an interesting point that was brought up, Mr. Chair, you brought up in terms of phasing in, and I know the conversation is had for on like water and sewer rates. I would imagine that under Prop 218, there's going to be a legal question as well too for the City Attorney's Office. Under Prop 218, in order to be compliant with 218, that there could be no cross subsidies between users for the cost of the service provided, which would include a phase in because that would allow for a subsidy. Is there any 218 experts on the line?
Councilmember Caitlin's Hilda Mendoza again, Deputy City Attorney. I know that Ms. Denow, it seems to be having some issues with her computer right now. So I do not have the answer for that for you, but we certainly could look into that and then get back to you.
Okay. How about this one? If the service is provided by a non-government entity in California, are they subject to Prop 218? The hauler would provide the service. Are they required to comply with 218? A franchise hauler, excuse me.
So if I'm, again, this is Hilda Mendoza, if I am understanding the question correctly, the answer would be no.
Okay, thank you. I think some have, well, actually, let's say that we're staying on the subject of Prop 218. Jordan, in your analysis, are there any other entities in the state of California that do I'm talking about government agencies, that do a pay-as-you-throw program? Not haulers, private haulers, I'm talking about actual, it's tough because I think we're probably the only government who provides it, but I don't think like LADWP, I don't know if they do sanitation at LADWP, but are there any of those government entities that do a pay-as-you-throw program?
So yes. So when you look at our chart, the three that we threw on there, Fresno, Long Beach, Sacramento, they all do the pay-as-you-throw style but it's one of the considerations around Prop 218 too. It's not really pay-as-you-throw because we don't measure each thing as it comes out. It's all based on the can size. But the can size is a different level of service. So you are providing a rate based on the level of service that you're providing to that entity. But basically, when you see pay-as-you-throw, it's that idea of, based on your can size, you can have different rates for different entities.
No, that's what I kind of assumed that because I don't know how you deal with 218 when in that respect, but that makes sense now. So, okay, appreciate that. Some folks I know, even an editorial that was released today, made this assumption, and I think it's a leap, to be quite honest. But if we paid for the service, that somehow our diversion goals would be better. And I guess I take issue that the council member who represents the landfill, love ESD, Renee, everything you do, 100% behind you, support you. I want to keep that landfill going as much as possible, folks. Recycle. We've done all the programs, Christmas trees, pumpkins, you name it. We want to recycle as much as possible within the city of San Diego and keep that place open. But the Center for Sustainable Energy released a study in 2020 looking at diversion rates just amongst cities in San Diego, and I would note that there are other cities other than the city of San Diego who have worse diversion rates than us, and those cities pay for trash. So, I don't think it's an easy one-to-one causation or correlation in terms of if you pay, somehow magically our diversion rates are gonna go up. I don't think it's that simple. So I just want to throw that out there. I just think that in this whole conversation, I think multiple things can be true at the same time. I understand the points of those who support repealing the People's Ordinance. I get it. I think there's a lot of other thoughts that need to go into the process before you get to steps 2, 3, and 4. Some of them should be brought forward today, and those are considerations I think that we need to give. If others have the basic being, if others have choice because of service and the quality of service that's going to be offered to them, if they're paying for that service, do we not give that option to single-family homeowners as well too? I don't see why not, nonetheless. So, obviously this will be other more conversation around this moving forward. Appreciate the command by our chair, and getting some answer to this, whether yay or nay, and moving on with our lives is one that I'm sure I'll look forward to. But by the time this gets done, I'll be at the end of my term as well too. So. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the conversation.
Thank you, Councilmember Kate. We will now go to Councilmember LaCava, and I messed up the order there.
It keeps us on our toes. I want to thank Chair Elo Rivera for reactivating this in-depth discussion on the People's Ordinance, and to my colleagues for your thoughtful questions and comments. This too was on my priority list for this committee because reconsidering this century-old structure of trash pickup is long overdue. Chair, your leadership brought this to the forefront. It is no longer the third rail in San Diego politics or a San Diego special, but an issue that demands our collective effort. We are a new council, a new mayor. We're cleaning up old business and exerting bold leadership. The political will is there. Our needs require it, and we will be responsive to San Diegans and shy away no more from the hard conversations and the difficult decisions. Importantly, we can continue to bring this action forward with transparency and building consensus. I want to thank the members of the public who called in, and a special thanks to Jordan and the IBA's office for your report and thoughtful analysis in your presentation and your patience in answering our questions. And thank you, as was highlighted, for the IBA's continual reminding us of this issue as we look at how we run our city. The IBA did cover several factors and benefits I think we should consider. Looking at the potential impacts the IBA outlined, I see 4 significant benefits to amending the ordinance. Fairness in how residents pay for trash, especially for vacation rental properties, and the impact of cost-burden renters, considering we are a population that is renter majority. Improvements to the level of service in neighborhoods and ability to provide greater customization for residents. This will be increasingly important, as others have stated, as the city implements SB 1383 and families deposit organic waste in separate bins, reducing the need for large traditional bins. Ability to redirect money in the general fund to spend on other priorities, as my colleagues have highlighted, especially as we are facing state mandates on issues such as climate change and our own priorities in that regards, and a pathway towards the goal of zero waste and climate action plan. In fact, this is an excellent example of how investing in climate mitigation should not be an isolated action. Rather, it carries associated benefits that improve our quality of life, levels a grossly unbalanced cost of service, and frees up funding for much needed city services and infrastructure. Our chair has done a great job in bringing this matter front and center. The media has been posting numerous articles, including today's editorial in the Union Tribune. This is an open and transparent process with many steps ahead of us, including, as has been noted several times, a vote of the people, and upwards of 2 or more years before any new fee would be imposed. So just a couple of questions, some of which my colleagues kind of touched on, but I want to look at them slightly different. We are fortunate to have great leadership and workers in our environmental services department. unlike the other enterprise funds, sewer, water, development services that are exclusively run by city workers, environmental services obviously has these non-exclusive franchises out there, but I want to be assured that we will protect the city jobs that currently work in environmental services through this process. If there's any reason to believe that we wouldn't, I'm not sure who wants to answer that, but.
So the one thing that I will point out is that the way the municipal code and the people's ordinance is currently written is it does require city forces to pick up the residential refuse. So it does require us to utilize city staff. Again, it all depends on how this council would move forward, but there are ways that which, as you move forward with a potential ballot measure, you could maintain, whatever city forces are there. So but the measures currently constructed requires us to operate the system the current way that we do.
Okay, I appreciate the comments of my colleague, but that would be very important to me. There was a comment, I think, by the public that somehow this issue is seeking to divide us. I think this actually is an attempt to bring us together under the same umbrella. So to that, did the IBA do the flip side analysis? What if we extend free collection to all the multifamily residences so that we're all on a level playing field? Did you do that calculation?
We did not. It is important to note, though, that multifamily collection, and we point this out with some of the other cities as well, it is a different line of service. It requires, different pickup schedules, different bins, different styles of things that would happen. So that would really have required an analysis that went well beyond the ask, because you would basically have to be costing out a level of service, an entire service stream that the city currently does not provide. And we didn't look at other cities and how they do it and what they charge just because we had nothing to compare it to.
And I certainly understand that, but I think, in terms of this issue of bringing everybody under the same umbrella, that is the other choice. And clearly we could not afford that under our current circumstances. And I think, I guess the only other, actually, I think I'm going to close it out there. Again, I want to thank the IBA for your effort in this latest go round and your continuing effort to highlight that. I appreciate the thoughts and questions by my colleagues on this, this one of many steps we're going to go through this process. All the members of the public that took the time to call in, and a special thanks to our chair, Elo Rivera, for bringing this front and center and reactivating this discussion. So with that, I'll close out my comments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember LaCava. Thank you to my colleagues here for, as always, super thoughtful questions. I just want to say how much I appreciate you three for showing up and doing your homework and asking good questions. This is a great example of that. We certainly all benefit as a result of that hard work. And then finally, again, thank you, Jordan, Jeff, and the IBA team for your considerable work to address this issue that is just continues to be a topic of conversation in San Diego. So with that, we will move to item 3. Brendan, can you please introduce our next item?
Item 3, presentation by the Rocky Mountain Institute, impact of land use on vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions. The public comment period for this item is now open. If you have already joined the Zoom webinar online or by phone, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. If you are watching on City TV or the live stream online and would like to call into the meeting to speak, please call 1-669-254-5252. When prompted, input webinar ID 160-532-0355#. To raise your hand to speak, select the raise your hand button or press *9. Chair.
Thank you, Brendan. Before turning it over to RMI, I do want to provide some context here. A lot is happening locally with around the nexus of land use and greenhouse gas emissions, specifically emissions coming from on-road transportation, which is our single largest source of GHGs. Most notably, we're updating our climate action plan and felt this is an important topic to discuss ahead of the release of the draft. Additionally, our friends at the Climate Action Campaign released a report titled Solving Sprawl that proposes strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through infill development. RMI has conducted extensive research on land use, vehicle miles traveled, and GHGs, which is why we felt it was important to hear from experts on the topic and discuss their proposed strategies to achieve lower emissions in urban environments. So with that, I will turn it over to the experts at RMI. Staff from RMI, if you could please introduce yourselves for the record and let us know how much time you need.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Chair Elo Rivera, for inviting us and other distinguished council members for having us here today. My name is Julia Thane de Mordaunt. I'm Principal of Urban Transformation at RMI, and I'll be joined by my colleagues, Zach Subin and Ben Holland. We'll need 15 minutes for our presentation.
Great, Julia. Please proceed.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you again for inviting us here today. As I mentioned, I'm joined by Zach Subin and Ben Holland, who've done much of the research that I'll be showing you here today. RMI, the institute where I work, is a global, nonpartisan nonprofit that works with government, communities, and companies to advance climate action policies and programs that improve lives. My program, in particular, Urban Transformation, works directly with cities and their ecosystem of stakeholders to make sure that we're reducing greenhouse gas emissions by building more housing, more transit, more and better streets for people, more jobs, and more accessibility. And that's really what I'm here to talk to you about today. I understand, as you said, the Chair, in your comments, that you're in the midst of revising your climate action plan and that you're planning to set very bold targets. I want to present to you research that shows how bold targets have to be met with bold actions, specifically in terms of building urban infill. And that's a term that refers to new development that's on vacant, undeveloped, or underdeveloped land within existing communities. So first, I want to take a step back, though. About a year ago, RMI did a technical analysis to determine how the US could meet its climate action targets. The goal of the analysis was to figure out what the US needed to do this decade, so between now and 2030, during our decade of climate action, in order to get on the pathway of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2050. On the right-hand side of this screen, you'll see the charts that we developed. So on the top is the curve of reduction that we'll need overall in our greenhouse gases in order to reach that ambitious target. Below is the chart that shows the breakout of those reductions by sector. The spoiler alert of that research is that we're going to have to change some things. The US is 4% of the global population and 11% of all GHG emissions. But we produce 33% of car and light truck greenhouse gas pollution. In order to reach our targets for just transportation, we have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 45% below 2005 levels by 2030. So how do we do that? It's very tempting, and I think tempting for some folks in the sustainability industry, to think that we can get out of this mess by putting electric vehicles on the road. What we quickly found out, though, is that the math doesn't pencil out. We can't solve the climate crisis by just electrifying everything. In the US, we have to both convert 70 million existing internal combustion engine vehicles to electric vehicles and reduce how much we drive by 20%. It is not an either-or situation, it is a both and. We've started to do some research to look at how we can reduce VMT, or vehicle miles traveled, by 20% in the US. And this chart shows the impacts, or the waterfall chart, of the 5 strategies that we came up with. And these are 5 of many strategies. There's much more work to be done. The first strategy, the one you see in that first greenish blue bar, is around land use. Changing how we use land in cities by building more urban infill housing, by building missing middle housing, by building around transit, by bringing jobs and resources closer to existing housing, is by far and away the most impactful thing that we can do to reduce vehicle miles traveled. The second thing is to change how we price the use of the road and the curb. We often think driving is free. It is not. Driving isn't free, and it's about time that we start to price how we use the road and also car ownership. The third is about ending highway expansions. It's crazy to me that we are still building highways for many different reasons, starting with the fact that systemic racism is one of the reasons why we built highways to begin with. But it's also insane because urban land is so valuable. In fact, in San Diego, the average value of a residential street, if it were to be converted into a single housing unit, is $150,000. The fourth strategy is around redesigning streets so that they're better places for people to walk and roll and take transit. And then finally, one of the other things that we looked at is how you manage how much people travel to get to their jobs or elsewhere by adopting transportation demand management policies. For the purposes of this 15-minute presentation, I'm only going to talk about land use, but Ben or Zach or I would be happy to come back and discuss these other measures. One of the toughest things about reducing how much people drive in this country is that we've built our cities around cars, and this includes San Diego. So over the next couple of slides, I'm going to click you through a time lapse of how San Diego has evolved over time. You'll see on this slide pre-World War II development, and it's concentrated in that dark blue color in the city center. Flash forward to 1945 to 1964, which is that light blue, you start to see a little bit more sprawl. 1964 to 1980 in yellow, again, more sprawl. 1980 to 1995 in orange, and then finally 1995 to 2018 in red. What you can clearly see in this time lapse is that the bulk of recent construction, which is the red and orange color, has happened very far from the urban core. And all over California, the same is true. Sprawl is pushing into the Central Valley, into the Inland Empire, and more housing is being built on the wildland-urban interface at the highest risk of wildfires. The problem with that is when you push people to the suburbs and exurbs, they emit more. Car-dependent land use exacerbates urban emissions to the tune of the equation: sprawl equals bigger houses, plus more cars, plus more roads, plus more land. And this is true even when you control for income. So a household with the same income will produce much lower emissions in a dense urban neighborhood, which on this map is represented in blue, than in a suburb, which on this map, again, the total household carbon footprint is higher if it's in red. But the problem gets even worse because San Diego has made it hard to build. We built way less housing than needed to keep up with demand. And in fact, the entire state of California ranks 49 out of 50 states for per capita housing construction. And the places that are building more housing, so if you look at this chart, Dallas and Atlanta and Houston, are places where your constituents are moving. That's bad for San Diego for a multitude of reasons. It's also bad for the planet, because the carbon footprint per household of the San Diego, Carlsbad, San Marco area is lower than 85% of US metropolitan areas. So that brings me back to my headline. The number one thing that San Diego can do on climate action is to build more. One of the biggest problems that we have with city climate action plans is that they think of population distribution, so where people live, as an exogenous factor, meaning it's outside of the equation of how we can change things. It's something that we can't or cities can't control. But the fact of the matter is that local policies absolutely determine where people can and cannot live. And the number one available lever for San Diego to reduce emissions using local policy is to build infill housing. So that means housing in low carbon footprint areas within the city, instead of housing being built elsewhere, which would have a much higher carbon footprint. If you look at this chart, you see very closely related to this urban infill bar, which is at the top, is number 3, vehicle miles traveled reduction, through the other 4 mechanisms in the waterfall chart that I showed you at the top of the presentation. So I'm going to leave you with this slide here, which shows for the entire US where the highest potential is for building urban infill housing. You'll see on the chart that the x-axis is household income, the y-axis is the household greenhouse gas footprint, and the color of the dots is density, so red being more dense, blue being less dense areas. What the circle shows is where we need to build more. We need to build more housing in dense areas with lower carbon footprint and mixed incomes, full stop. And if we do this across the entire US, we could avoid 200 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent emissions, basically the equivalent of electrifying everything, or in this case, electrifying buildings. The key message that I want you to take away from this presentation, and hopefully from the answers that Ben and Zach and I are able to provide, is that now is the time to reform exclusionary and car-centric planning rules. Policies like removing parking minimums, removing minimum setbacks, upzoning to duplexes and quadplexes, building density around transit, permitting ADUs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And our only hope really for making this the decade of climate action is to make sure that we connect housing policy and building more to the sustainability of our cities. Thank you again for giving me this opportunity to present, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Julia, for that. We will now proceed with public comment. Brendan, take it away.
To raise your hand to speak, select the raise your hand button or input *9. When I let you know it is your turn to speak, unmute yourself by either selecting the unmute button or by inputting *6. We have a few people in the queue. First speaker, San Diego Green New Deal.
Good afternoon. This is Bertha Rodriguez calling on behalf of Climate Action Campaign, a member of the San Diego Green New Deal Alliance. San Diego is in the midst of two major crises that are harming communities of concern: the climate emergency and the housing affordability. While elected officials often tell us that climate and housing are two separate issues, the fact is both are interconnected. As Councilmember Elo Rivera mentioned earlier, last month, Climate Action Campaign released a report called Solving Sprawl, Building Housing for Sustainable and Equitable San Diego, outlining 3 key strategies to solve these crises. Number 1, build more homes in existing cities. Number 2, invest in existing communities and prevent displacement. And number 3, promote equity, justice, and health. Today, we ask the Environmental Committee to lead with these strategies to accelerate infill development in our region and ensure an equitable and climate-safe future for all San Diegans. Thank you to the insightful presentation and Councilmember Elo Rivera for elevating these critical issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Luis Rodolico.
Well, Julia, you're preaching to the choir. I can give you 2 major points. Here in University City, we have 2 major roads incomplete in South UC, and we have to go on the interstate to drive within our own community. And it is brought to us by environmental groups who don't want bridges over canyons, and a local mall who wants only one road to have all the traffic, because the more cars that are on the road, the more they can charge in rents. So that's a big, big problem. Now, here in University City, we also tried to build some affordable housing on a site that you could build it on. And basically, environmental groups objected and city planning objected. And the reason why city planning objects is University City is the site for the largest eco-tourist event in the United States, where people that are environmental did not want a low-income housing project to be built. So when it was in the framing stage, they burned it to the ground. $50 million, 2003, Crossroads fire. Every time environmental groups say in university that they don't want this particular housing project built, planning basically soils themselves and capitulates. It happens every single time. Now, we can't get housing built in university because of this dynamic. And the mayor, he touted the climate action plan, but I don't even know what that means. If you're going to allow us to drive out of our community, to drive within our community without roads, if you're going to soil yourself every time an environmental group says you can't build this, you have no say in what's going on with the environment. So I appreciate your presentation, Julia, but I'm telling you, you're going to find a lot of resistance from environmental groups who don't want to build in the city. They're trying to turn all of the open space into preserves where we can't even walk in them. Good luck.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker, Jeff Huter.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. First, I'd just like to make a note about the slide that you showed permit rates in San Diego compared to some other metropolitan areas in the United States, and frankly, comparing San Diego, which is in California, which has a lot more constraints on building housing, with places like Houston, which has no zoning whatsoever, and Dallas and Atlanta and Phoenix. You know, those are really probably cherry picked, but bad comps for San Diego. You really ought to look at compare numbers to, you know, LA or San Francisco, or go out of state to Portland, Seattle, New York. You know, let's get some real comps on sort of putting the blame on building availability. And the reason is, when you start talking, none of those other places are doing infill development. You know, when you start talking about infill development, the first thing you have to start thinking about is just, you know, how expensive the land is, and why at the same time we're making, supposedly addressing an environmental issue. We need to recognize that it's contrary to the equity side of it. If you're only allowing more expensive housing to be built, by definition, you're making it difficult to be more affordable. And then the other thing that's always missing in all these presentations, it's not where the housing is that drives transit adoption, it's where the jobs are. And instead of thinking this always in terms of a housing problem, we need to start thinking about it as an economic development problem and addressing our polycentric job map. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Dana Givett.
Thank you. I have a question. San Diego has an unusual ADU code that allows for up to 3-story apartment buildings to be built in front and backyards. When this happens and these are built, the 75 and 100-year-old trees that compose our urban canopy are clear cut. How do you reconcile the infilling with the clear cutting of the existing urban canopy?
Dana, this isn't a question and answer period. Do you want to continue with your comments? And if your question may be addressed by the council members.
That's fine. I would just like to say that there's a disconnect there, that in doing the infilling, it comes at the expense of the urban canopy. And I'm not sure that what is being created aren't heat islands at the expense of the urban canopy. And I'm not sure that that is actually making for a better environment for anyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair, that concludes public comment on this item.
Thank you, Brendan. Thank you to everyone who called in and shared your opinions and asked questions there. I will now turn it over to committee members for their questions and comments. As a reminder, this is an informational item only. No motion is required, and we will start with Vice Chair Von Holper.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much for all the callers who called in throughout this whole meeting. It's always really great to get a lot of public participation in environmental issues. So I appreciate all of your voices. Thank you very much for the presentation to the Rocky Mountain Institute. You know, this is a delicate balance, the need for housing in low-cost housing, especially in San Diego, and the need to preserve our environment and worry about climate change. And it's, I mean, everything we vote on here at City Hall is a balance, but this is a particularly difficult one. This is a topic I recently struggled with a few weeks ago when reviewing a suburban project in one of the highest VMT areas of our city up in my district. SANDAG has determined that the average acceptable VMT should, for certain, make sure that we're meeting our climate action goals, of VMT per capita of 15% below the regional average. What we approved was up to 43% VMT of the regional average. So it blew VMT out of the water. The project said it's going to generate over 8,000 car trips a day. It's in my district, we don't have much transit. I took transit to work yesterday for Clean Air Day, and I can do it relatively simply up and down the 15, but I can't get around once I get home. So, and the 56 freeway isn't planning on having transit until 2050. But I went down swinging, so, which is okay. It doesn't mean you're going to win every vote. So I just, it's a hard balance. You know, we need housing and we also need to make sure that we're not putting so many cars on the road when we build this housing that our greenhouse gas emissions are going up. So I just love, my only question is, based on your analysis of what's worked in other cities, you know, what are some policies you have seen to help promote infill with urban areas, help us meet our very real housing crisis, but also help reduce VMT? Because I know, like, you know, cities in Texas, for example, are just huge and they're sprawl. They're not like San Diego, and nor is New York City like San Diego or even San Francisco. So how do you have a semi-urban, you know, semi-transit oriented comparison that we could build upon?
Councilmember, thank you very much for your question. I should have mentioned at the top that I am zooming in from Los Angeles and used to be a member of Mayor Garcetti's office in Los Angeles, focused on economic development and transportation. So very much understand the need to look at California examples and also to look at suburban and urban contexts. For this question, though, I'm going to invite my colleague, Zach Subin, to unmute himself and to talk about some of the policies that he's seen in California and elsewhere that promote urban infill and housing.
Thank you. You know, I will say that this is, you know, this is a policy area where the state has a lot of catching up to do. And, you know, there's not necessarily that many shining examples to point to. I think it's sort of a long overdue conversation that we're having. I do know that there are cities like Portland and Berkeley and Minneapolis who've recently made changes to allow at least small multifamily housing throughout the city. So that is one example of a policy that you know, that we believe would help. Eliminating parking requirements is another example. You know, when you mandate minimum parking, that's essentially subsidizing more car use and making housing more expensive. So we would certainly support reforming that. And yeah, I think, you know, it's there are cities outside the U.S., honestly, that are doing the best on this that we can look to. You know, there's certainly literature we can point you to kind of see best practices in other places.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate you guys, all your work and being here today. And those are all my comments and questions.
Thank you, Vice Chair. We will now go to Councilmember LaCava.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Julia, Zach, and Ben. Perhaps we'll hear from you, Ben. I agree with your conclusion that San Diego must build housing, and in particular, build housing affordable to all income levels. As you point out on the maps you presented, adding housing away from job centers is a significant contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. To reverse this, we must recognize that our job centers are unlikely to move, but we need to build housing close to the existing job centers and where we can to create new job centers. For example, the efforts out in Chollas Valley. We used to call that Encanto, but where we have the housing, but no jobs. We need to build housing that is affordable to the employees that work in those job centers, the blue collar worker, the service worker, the public sector worker. And I will add that your analysis ties nicely to the recent report released by the Climate Action Campaign. Their work links sprawl with the within San Diego County to increasing transportation emissions and the associated impacts on equity and environmental justice. So I think we can all agree that sprawl is bad. I think we've realized that since 1950s, but I think hopefully we're turning the corner on that. And as we said, the way to reverse this trend, as you suggest, is affordable infill and transit-oriented development where we have real transit and real infrastructure to support that. I'm also going to add that we need to build more, but we also must consider all options. The conversation about the expense in building housing is a difficult one. Last month, I brought an item to our Land Use and Housing Committee on the opportunity to leverage public lands to build more affordable housing at the scale we need. We need to make it easier to build in San Diego and reduce costs such as land acquisition where possible. And this is important because unlike the other cities mentioned in the presentation, we ensure that new construction carries with it the worker and environmental protections that we value here in California. And with that, I'm going to close my comments, Chair, and I want to thank you again to the good folks from RMI for sharing your analysis and to the Chair for bringing this item on the docket. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember LaCava. We will now go to Councilmember Kate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation and appreciate the comments by my colleagues. I think you'll find a pretty friendly bunch when it comes to development and the need for housing, at least with this group, and housing of all types and all across the entirety of the city. But the first slide, and you raised an interesting point, and something I've actually been thinking about, and it kind of triggered with comments by my colleague, Councilmember Von Wolper, when it comes to VMT travels. The districts that we represent are more suburban in nature, away from your heavier job center communities for the most part. And we were talking about development and looking at VMTs in these certain neighborhoods. How do you count for electric vehicles and the usage of electric vehicles, knowing that San Diego, and just trying to Google real quick, where we rank amongst other cities, we're always either in the top 5 or top 10 in the country in terms of the number of electric vehicles. And how do you line that with VMTs? Like myself, I drive an electric vehicle. There's Tesla supercharging stations going up everywhere. One just released in near Mesa. I know one's going up in Councilmember Wolper's district in Scripps Ranch, a brand new one. I mean, they're going everywhere. How do you count for that and looking at VMTs, and are all VMTs built the same?
It's an excellent question, Council Member, and I'm going to ask Ben to unmute himself and to answer, and maybe also Ben to speak to transportation demand management and commercial rebalancing as well.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Julia. Yeah, on the EV question, I would have to look at the numbers for San Diego, but I think it's important to take into account the fact that if you look at our analysis at a US level, the level of adoption needed at the 70 million EVs on the road by 2030 is very ambitious. So that would represent, that means going from less than 2 million today and then 8.5 years going to 70 million. I don't know what the uptake would have to look like in San Diego. We can look at that. But yeah, even under the most wildly ambitious or optimistic adoption scenarios, we'd have to reduce VMT. So, and yeah, again, I think we could probably provide some San Diego specific analysis on that. As Julia mentioned, we are very interested in a number of different VMT reduction interventions. So we've been looking at transportation demand management strategies. For instance, in the city of Seattle, they have a trip reduction strategy that they actually enforce with employers to ensure that those employers are providing alternatives to single occupancy vehicle ridership. The question of parking came up earlier that I kind of wanted to jump in on that one too. Parking pricing, I think, can be what we think can be a very effective measure for reducing VMT, and if tailored appropriately, could fund alternatives. So there's this kind of chicken and egg situation. You mentioned outlying suburbs. Transit's not going to be very strong there. You're not going to have high frequency transit. But once you if you lay the foundation of getting the pricing right, put in those minimum parking requirements, in some cases you might need maximums to ensure that you don't have too robust of a parking stock. That frees up some more revenue for investing in that transit.
Yeah, don't disagree with really any of that. I asked the question because just me personally, I'm a believer we need to build everywhere. To be honest with you, I think we're that dire of a situation when it comes to our housing situation. And you talk about chicken or egg, in terms of transit and where we go and whatnots. And I don't want to say no or yes based on what is there or not. I think it just needs to go there. So understanding though, I would love to be near job centers and whatnot, but the housing crisis is so dire I think we need to get units online. So appreciate the analysis. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for documenting this.
Thank you, Councilmember Kate. Thank you to my colleagues for your questions. Julia, thank you to you and your team at RMI for for coming here and sharing your expertise. This has been a hot topic in San Diego, and we want to make sure the decisions that we make are grounded in fact and data. But I think it's important also that when we're presented with facts and data, we recognize that, and we don't reverse engineer our positions or our conclusions based on what we want to hear, but we actually use the data to drive the decision making. And what RMI has brought to us today, what the Climate Action Campaign and their allies shared last month, is basically the same conclusion that the Urban Land Institute and the Sierra Club came to in 2005, and that is that we have to be more amenable to infill development. They did an awesome myths and facts report in 2005 that addresses a lot of the same concerns and arguments that are brought up now when it comes to infill development. And I'm not to say that any of this is easy or comfortable, but I do think that we have to reckon with the fact that there's actually almost a pattern, the conversation that we're having here and the one that we just had. How many times, if we're going to govern ourselves responsibly, if we're going to act responsibly as a society and as a community, or how many times do we have to hear the numbers and the facts before we actually take action? And I hope that we're in a place now that when it comes to creating housing opportunities in all neighborhoods, we're ready to let the facts guide us. Julie, if I can, I want to, one of the questions that it was actually a constituent of mine in District 9, she asked about trees. And there's a component of this that I think seems counterintuitive to some folks who really are concerned about the environment. And so can you talk about, the trade-off between, between housing being built where trees might have been, if replacing that tree helps offset the loss? Talk to us from from a climate perspective about that trade-off, because it isn't as intuitive to everyone as it might seem.
Absolutely, Councilmember, happy to do so. Nothing in my presentation should suggest that we should not have trees in cities or that we should have fewer trees in cities. One of the things that we are working on, in addition to how you build housing in low carbon areas and cities, is how you use nature-based solutions to help offset some of the emissions that we're already producing. I think, again, and I point back to this dichotomy that's often put between electric vehicles and reducing vehicle miles traveled. It is not an either or with ADUs or urban infill and trees. It is a both and. We really need to make sure that we are increasing urban forestry, that we are addressing urban heat islands, that we are doing all that we can really to embrace nature-based solutions as we do with housing. I think, though, what I do want to point to is that when we look at the population growths that we're going to be seeing in cities, still the number one factor that we see that helps with reducing emissions is building that infill housing. So in terms of numbers, just again, facts and data, that is the number one measure. But we are absolutely pro trees at RMI, and I personally, am pro trees and pro having an urban tree canopy.
Thanks, Julia. Yeah, a big fan of trees myself, and maybe I might even hug one after today's meeting. But it's not as simple as as it might seem. I just want to take a moment to say that when it comes to the climate crisis, a lot of times our discussions focus on what will be lost, and there's just so much that can be gained by taking the necessary steps to respond to the crisis. And the policy solutions that are put forward by RMI, that were put forward last month by the Climate Action Campaign and their Solving Sprawl report demonstrate that. We need people to live closer to where they go. And that means providing San Diegans a chance to live near their jobs, near existing transit, and near where they can shop and dine. In creating these housing opportunities, we can correct generations of unjust land use policies that segregated our neighborhoods. We can allow for the barista at your favorite coffee shop to live close enough to be able to walk to work. We can provide lower income families with opportunities to live in neighborhoods with great schools. This is actually part of solving the climate crisis. That should be very exciting for us, even if it's a bit uncomfortable. So I'm very, very hopeful that as we dive into the facts that our council continues to be data-driven, we can see the opportunities that lie before us. I want to take a moment here to read something from a report. It says, as this country continues to grow and change, communities are left to figure out where all these new people will live, work, and shop. New markets are emerging for real estate that offers a more convenient lifestyle than is offered by many low-density sprawling communities. New compact developments with a mix of uses and housing types throughout the country are being embraced as a popular alternative to sprawl. At the core of the success of these developments is density, which is the key to making these communities walkable and vibrant. Unfortunately, in too many communities, higher density mixed-use development is difficult to construct because of zoning and building codes that favor low-density development with segregated uses and because of opposition from the community. This is from that 2005 Urban Land Institute and Sierra Club report that I mentioned before. So for 16 years plus, we've been having the folks who dig into the data, who are analyzing the science, and who are committed to appropriately responding to the climate crisis tell us that this is part of the solution. I hope that San Diego can embrace that more and more. Again, all of us have an opportunity to gain if we do so. So thank you again, Julia, Zach, and Ben for presenting here. I definitely look forward to reading more of what you all produce, and I appreciate you sharing your expertise here today. Again, this was an informational item only, so no motion is required. So with that, we will now adjourn the committee meeting to the next meeting, which is later on this month on October 21st, 2021 at 9 a.m. Have a great day.
Darling, I can't explain